drive at that time. It became apparent that there was no such funding available for any protection works at the time. However, we did, in talking to Mr. Zuzek at the time, who I've known from the past, suggest there may be an opportunity to pursue a more holistic approach through Natural Resources Canada's what they call climate change platform. So a report was brought in November 2017 asking if council wanted to be one of the partners on that at the time and would support financially over a couple of years with this study along with other partners. So the application was made in late fall of 2017 and approved about this time last year. So the study really got kick-started last summer about this time. Back in January, Mr. Zuzek was here for a very initial introductory presentation for everyone. Since that time, they have completed their vulnerability assessment work. We had an initial meeting in April where we had approximately 300 people attend out in Erio at 3 different sessions. We subsequently had 4 other meetings just a couple weeks ago in Erio as well, where we had 4 different sessions and had roughly, there's probably 250 people that attended those sessions as well. At that session, we walked through the vulnerability assessment that's been completed, some potential solutions at the time, and we had some facilitated workshops to get people thinking about what's important to them, what kind of solutions can we potentially be looking at. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete Zuzek, who's the study lead of Zuzek Inc., and he's going to walk through a condensed version of that vulnerability assessment for you, talk about some of the feedback we received from the community, and then he's going to talk a little bit about next steps for the study.
Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for having me here tonight, and good evening, everyone from Council as well, and members of the audience. It's an honor to be here and present to you the findings of the study to date, and most importantly, once we get through these slides, to take any questions that you may have and try to answer them for you. As Bruce highlighted here, there's a number of partners in this study, and it's important to acknowledge them. Natural Resources Canada provided the seed money for this study and got things off the ground. The municipality of Chatham-Kent provided significant cash funding and in-kind funding for the study, as has the Lower Thames Conservation Authority, been a very important partner throughout all this work. We do have a steering committee that we update regularly on the work that we're doing, and that steering committee has representation from all levels of government. And then, most importantly, the partners are the community, the people here in Chatham-Kent, because this is a study for you, and we're working very hard to engage all members of the community in this work. So what I'll present here tonight will be the results, condensed results of the climate change science, the research that we've been doing over the last year, and then, as Bruce highlighted, take the audience through the vulnerability and risk assessment, and then transition into resilience and case studies. So what do we mean when we talk about community resilience, and what are some of the ideas we're trying to bring forward and develop with the community to deal with some of these hazards that are affecting the community across the Lake Erie shoreline. And then we'll conclude with some feedback that we received from the last round of community meetings, and as I mentioned, of course, take any questions or comments that you have. So the first part here is the results of the climate change impacts, and we're looking specifically at impacts on storms that impact the lake and cause the flooding and the erosion damages. So we have to first look at history a little bit, and the graph that you have up on the screen here, if we look at the x-axis, we have time. So this is 1918 to present. So we have over 100 years of lake levels. The lake levels are the blue lines, so the squiggly up and down. This is the seasonal fluctuations as well as the long-term fluctuations in lake level. On the y-axis here is the elevation of the lake. And so we can see that historically we had record lows back in the Dust Bowl era in the 1930s, and where we are today, on the far right here, is the record highs. So we're setting new record highs daily here on Lake Erie. But we have seen highs in the past again. If we go back to 1986, the 1970s was a period of highs as well. So first key takeaway is that lake levels fluctuate. This is a natural process. It's been happening through the recorded history and well back in time. What's more important, though, as we move through this study and we look to develop solutions for the community, is thinking about where will things go in the future. And so if we start with the lows, and I know that a lot of people are not thinking about low lake levels right now, but if we look at the historical lows back in the 30s, the research that Environment Canada is presently doing on water levels suggests that the lake levels could fall even a meter lower than they have historically. And that, of course, has significant impacts for navigation and the marina basins, for example. If we look to the highs, which is the area that we're, of course, immediately concerned with now, that dashed line is the 100-year. This is a statistical summary of a lake level that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. It's also referred to as the 100-year storm. Again, looking and factoring into the impacts of climate change on our water supply, Environment Canada's latest reports are suggesting that we could expect another half meter in the future. So the highs that we're facing now across this community, imagine another half meter of water on top of Lake Erie. And that's what we need to plan for in the future to have resilient communities. So looking again to the future and the scientific work here on what is climate change doing to this community and to Lake Erie, the two graphics on the top show you warming that's happened historically, and we all know that our climate's warming, especially in northern Canada, 3 times faster than the world average. We sort of look into the future as the graph on the right-hand side, and this is looking at changes that we expect to happen by late century, so in the order of 2080, 60 years down the road. How much warmer will it be in the winter? And all those shades of red here, Lake Erie being down at the bottom, we're in that bar of 5 to 7 degrees warmer in the wintertime. And that has significant impacts on lake ice cover. So as we look to the graphics on the bottom, these are satellite pictures of various time frames in the past. The one on the far left, we're looking at a condition where Lake Erie is almost 100% ice covered. And we might think about that as our sort of historical baseline. Where were we in the 70s and 80s when we had those long, cold winters? The lake completely freezes. The graphic in the middle is a sort of a transition period where we have ice cover on the south side of the lake, but the shoreline here, excuse me, in Chatham-Kent is open and exposed to waves. Where we see things going in the future is a future by late century, if we stay on this current trajectory of warming and emissions, we are moving into a period where Lake Erie could be substantially ice-free all winter. So we're going from the scenario on the left where the lake would get locked down in the winter, strong storms would mean snowfall and strong winds. In the future, those same snowstorms are going to generate waves that are going to cause flooding and erosion problems year-round now on Lake Erie. So this is a major, major finding. It's a big deal because all of the hazards that you're exposed to now in the fall and the winter, or the fall and the spring during storm season, those, as we move further into the future and the impacts of climate change, are going to bring those hazards all year round. One of the other things we've been looking at quite closely is what does that mean for waves? And we've all seen the pictures and been down at the lake when we have these large storm events with the waves crashing into the seawalls, into the properties and into the bank and the bluffs. So this color map in the middle is what we call a heat map, and it's looking at projected changes in the future to the amount of storm energy or wave energy that's going to strike the shoreline when we get into that late century period for the projected warming. So if we zoom into Chatham-Kent here is Erie O. Typically that bay is locked down in ice in the wintertime. If this warming continues and we move to a period of ice-free conditions, the amount of storm energy is going to increase 120% in Rondo Bay. If we move to the Talbot Trail section between Erie O and Wheatley, 80% increase in the amount of energy striking the shoreline in the wintertime. To the east of Erie O, it's 70%, the yellow shading here. So these are very, very significant findings. In sort of simple terms, if we see this warming play out in the future, we're looking at erosion rates that could easily double in the future. So everything that we're dealing with now along the shoreline and within the community, all of the hazards, the land losses, you could expect that those things will double in magnitude in the future. All right, so that paints, I hope, a picture of the seriousness of this, because while this community is under tremendous threat right now, and there's crisis situations all around for high water and erosion. Climate change is going to make all of that worse in the future. And in some cases, already making it worse. So with that news, we move to vulnerability. So we understand, we have a best estimate of how the climate will change in the future and what that means from a planning perspective. Our next step then with this vulnerability assessment is to look at what do you do? Where are we most vulnerable, and how do we quantify that? So we want to start with the community of Erie-O. We have the navigation channel here. This is a photograph from 1955, but it helps convey some important messages here. So this, going back, the background image there is 1955, when Erie-O was still a coal port, a coal town, and we see the coal being piled up here beside the current marina basin. Some really important things are happening here with respect to the sand and the sediment dynamics. And so this channel here, the navigation channel into Erie-O, into the Rondo Bay, been there since the mid-1800s. And these series of colored lines show you where the shoreline was in red in 55 and the lakeward advancement of that shoreline over time to 2018. So the shoreline's moving lakeward because the sand's being trapped by this long pier or jetty. And of course, the whole history of Erie-O is built on trapping sediment and building up what was once a series of wayward islands. So that's been, you could say, argue a benefit, a positive thing for the community Erie-O where their beach has gotten bigger. But if we look just to the right, this is the southern tip of Rondo Provincial Park. All right, and so 1955, the shoreline was the red line here. Where we are today, this white outline that we surveyed last fall with the Conservation Authority. So 2018 is this white outline, a series of lines, again, chronicling the migration of that feature inland. If we go back to the really old maps to 1868, this dashed line is where the shoreline was approximately in 1868. So in 150 years, we've lost 650 meters of shoreline at the tip of the provincial park. Right? This is an enormous amount of loss, and it highlights the importance when we're looking for solutions, including the ones for your community, to understand these balances. So while the trapping of sediments on the left side of the map here has been a positive thing for Erie-O, and it's built up the beach on this side, there's been a tremendous loss of sediment here at the tip of the provincial park. And I think as many will know now, this feature is breached. The waves are moving through here, and the future of this little spit of sand now is very precarious. If it does totally disappear, we now have a potential where lake waves that are out in the lake that used to be sheltered from the bay used to be sheltered are going to propagate right into the bay now. So the amount of energy inside that bay once sheltered is going to increase dramatically. Of course, there's also sedimentation problems in the navigation channel and agitation problems for the commercial fishing fleet, et cetera. So there's a lot of issues that need to be worked on here that are going to require a lot of actors to come together and participate. The next map just shows you the amount of wetland loss, so 160 hectares of wetlands, and we all know how critical they are to our biodiversity. Over 160 hectares of wetlands have been lost because of that sand being trapped on the west side of the piers. And then, of course, that picture of our Fowler's toad friend here, it affects habitat too. And biodiversity, we all know, is critical. You may not be a lover of wetlands, but these features are very critical to our sustainability. They clean our water, they provide habitat for species. This frog is found in only a few places left in all of southern Ontario, and Rondo is one of them, Long Point, and these headlands here, bedrock headlands. If those beaches keep eroding, this species is going to become extinct. All right, so I would use this, think about this guy as an indicator. If this guy becomes extinct, there are going to be significant impacts inside that bay for the community and the built infrastructure. All right, high water impacts are also, of course, affecting the built infrastructure. So this is back in May, the fuel dock underwater, the boat launch is compromised, the commercial fishing fleet heavily impacted by high water. And this is that gap. So if we're looking, I'm standing here on the shoreline looking out to where once was Provincial Park, and now this is completely open to lake waves that can now propagate directly into the bay. Okay, so what does this mean for water levels? We'll start with the lows. Again, the historical low water level in Rondo Bay is the shading, the blue shading here. And so this is back in the early 30s. If Shrewsbury had been there, if Rondo Bay Estates had been there, they would be detached from the lake. There would be no water access. So the volume of water in Rondo Bay would be dramatically different. But if we factor in the impacts that Environment Canada is projecting due to climate change, this is the outline of Rondo Bay under low water, right? So dramatically different, significantly reduced. Whether there's an access channel out to the lake or not is really unknown. The important takeaway here is that as we plan for a future and build a community that's more resilient to these water level fluctuations, we have to deal with not only the projected highs, but also the projected lows. And I appreciate that people are not concerned about lows right now, but these are things that we have to factor into our decision making. So moving on to flooding. We've looked at flooding across the entire 90 kilometers of the study area. There's a couple quick snapshots here that show you the amount of inundation flooding that would happen during that 100-year storm or the 1% chance storm. And so the top frame here is the community of Erie. So we have back flooding here on the bay side. Shrewsbury here in the far right, dramatic inland flooding during that 100-year storm event. A large number of properties impacted, and of course they're already heavily impacted now, but it would be worse during that 100-year storm. Rondo Bay Estates, largely okay, a newer community that's gone through more stringent planning and where the homes are elevated and safe. So some of the channels are going to be full of water, but those homes are largely safe because they were built at a higher elevation. And then the Summer Place, again, the trailer park, quite heavily impacted. Now, we'll show you some numbers in a minute, but I want you also to keep in mind that this is the historical 100-year storm event. And so if we factor in climate change, we have to add a half meter of water on top of all these projections. So what we've done, just a real quick snapshot, we've built up a database of all the buildings that are susceptible to flooding. And this is just a schematic diagram here showing you how these individual parcels can have primary and secondary buildings. We've used mapping from the municipality. We've augmented that. We've factored in the assessed value of all those buildings and secondary buildings into our database so that we can look at, during these different flood scenarios, how many buildings are impacted. And so this is the big summary here for the 1% chance or the 100-year storm. So we look at, on the red is the Y1 axis here, number of affected buildings. So Erie Shore Drive on the order of 140 buildings impacted with an assessed value of $18 million on the Y2 axis here. Erie, the community of Erie, 100 buildings impacted, roughly on the order of $14 million of property potentially impacted by flooding. Shrewsbury, again, extremely low community, low lying, 180 buildings impacted with an assessed value of $10 million. Again, Rondo Bay Estates, we'll get back to this in a minute, but a community that's it's not as old, been built to proper flood-proof standings and relatively unimpacted by that 100-year storm event. And then of the Summer Place as well, the trailers, again, quite significant number of those impacted. All right, so we've done this everywhere. I'm giving you a snapshot of what we've done. There'll be lots of details on this, but these are all important things for us to understand our vulnerability across this community to these 100-year lake levels. And these, again, are the numbers without factoring in the half meter of climate change for higher lake levels. So we'll move to roads, and I understand that roads are a very topical issue right now. We have in here a couple areas where we're showing you some projections of where we expect the shoreline to be in the future. And so the three places here, number one is the Coatsworth area, 2 and 3 are closer to Erie. And what we've done is looked at the amount of historical erosion that's happened. We've measured at great detail, 20-meter increments, and then used that information to project where we expect the top of bank to be in the future. So the top of bank is that transition from the flat tablelands to the sloping bluff face. So the yellow polygon line there is showing you the estimate of where the shoreline is projected to be in 50 years due to natural historical conditions. Again, the takeaway here, as we move into a future of a warmer condition, less ice cover, this is not 50 years in the horizon, it's sooner, because the lake's going to be exposed to more storms. There's going to be more energy reaching these bluffs. Just to highlight the area in the top here, this is where the recent closure was, and showing you the magnitude of where that 100-year or 50-year projection is based on the historical erosion rates. We would expect that to happen sooner than 50 years in the future. So we have this, this mapping everywhere to help the community plan. Also, with respect to erosion, we want to look in the, primarily in the high bluff environments, where will buildings be impacted because of erosion? So this is a similar schematic diagram. It's not, doesn't have a geographic location. We have Lake Erie down at the bottom. We have that Toa Bluff is the blue line. The light blue is the top of bluff. And then we have buildings, primary and secondary buildings. This is that shaded yellow polygon from the previous graphic. So we're making estimates of where that top of bank line will be throughout the study area, and then counting with the GIS the number of parcels that have buildings, primary and secondary buildings impacted. All right, and so we've broken this analysis into 3 geographic areas. The first on the left is from the study boundary here near Wheatley over to Campbell Road, and then we take this large stretch here where Talbot Trail is very close to the bluff crest as one area, and the third is the eastern side of the study area. So looking at the numbers, again, the projections, the number of buildings impacted in the 50-year planning horizon, 150 in that stretch from Wheatley Provincial Park to Campbellville Road. Almost 150 buildings impacted in this small area here, with an assessed value of in the order of $18 million. We go to the middle stretch here, and we have on the order of 300 buildings affected with $40 million assigned to them. And then if we look to the east side of Rondo Provincial Park, the numbers go down a bit because the area is not as heavily developed. On the order of 40 buildings, $7 or $8 million worth of real estate impacted. So these are big, significant numbers of buildings that will be impacted by erosion in the future, and some of those, of course, we know are being impacted as we speak. Again, the other takeaway is that this 50-year time frame is based on historical erosion rates, and our best estimate is that those erosion rates are going to accelerate in the future, meaning this is going to happen in sooner than 50 years. Okay, so now that everybody's depressed and we're thinking, what the heck are we going to do? I would like to reassure Mayor, Your Excellency, and Council that there are options. And we've been working hard, as Bruce mentioned, in these community meetings to start working with all of the stakeholders about what to do. How do we move forward to deal with some of these significant challenges? So first, with respect to resilience, what do we mean by resilience? And when it comes to community planning and along the lakes, as lakeshore communities like we have here in Chatham-Kent, it means the ability to bounce back from storms, to learn, to adapt, to improve so the community can be better prepared for storms in the future. So it's being a learning community and learning from the past incidences. Also, is being able to project the future. So I'm talking a lot today about historical trends and also doing our best to share with you our expectations for what could happen in the future because of climate change. So we not only have to look out and see what's happening today, but we have to make our best estimate of what could happen in the future and then plan accordingly. So let me take you through some more slides. So one of the things that we like to do is break things up in these options. And so we have been talking to the community quite a bit about 4 types of adaptation. So how do you deal with these enormous threats and hazards that the community is facing? So one way is to avoid these hazards in the future, to make sure new development doesn't occur on hazardous lands. And this is what the Conservation Authority does on a daily basis. This is their job, to make sure you're building new things in a safe location. Accommodate. This is where we have an adaptive strategy to stay in the same footprint, to keep things status quo, but make a change in some way, raising a foundation so you're no longer susceptible to flooding. And so we'll share some ideas on accommodate. Protect is the more traditional approach, which is using structures, engineering, often called gray infrastructure, to harden the shoreline to deal with the flooding or the erosion hazards. And then the last option, which is something that's growing in popularity, it's growing in its adaptation, acceptance around the world, is something called retreat. And retreat is a strategic decision to withdraw or relocate public assets or private assets that are exposed to these hazards. And retreat means a whole bunch of different things, and I'll share some thoughts with you on that. So we'd like to break up these options into these 4 categories. So first of all, with avoid, and I touched on this earlier, but it's a perfect example, and it's right here in this community. So Shrewsbury is an older community built on previous fringes of the bay, very low lying, previously would have been marshland, and you see the extent of the inundation during the 100-year storm. If we look at the right-hand side, Rondo Bay Estates, all of these homes, the vast majority, are safe during the 100-year flood, and that's because the appropriate planning process was followed, the regulatory work, the CA did their job and made sure that the new construction was high enough not to be impacted. So this is a great example of how moving forward the community can take this approach to make sure that new things are not built in harm's way. All right, accommodate, the easiest and the most relevant example here is raising up foundations in low-lying areas. And so the top graphic there shows you schematically here where you have a wet foundation where you're either raising the grade around the home or you're potentially putting the structure on stilts or foundation on piles. And this is done a lot in hurricane susceptible areas, which would be the US South and the Gulf Coast. And this is an example where you make sure everything's high enough that those waves can move right underneath the structure. But that does happen in some places. The building on the right, this is Long Point. So down the lake a bit to the east, this home was built on these concrete piles so that it was safe from flooding. So now moving to protect. Now protect is, again, that traditional engineered approach where we make a conscious decision, the community, government make a decision that we have to protect these assets in place. We have to do something proactive and make significant investments. And a really good example here is Presque Isle State Park on the south shore of Lake Erie to the east of here, southeast. This is Pennsylvania's shoreline. They have a small snippet of Lake Erie shoreline. And this park is a very important thing for a number of reasons. It creates sheltered, the sand spit creates sheltered water for industry and commerce, the marina basins. It's also a very popular swimming beach. It's one of the few sand beaches in the state of Pennsylvania on Lake Erie. And it's also an extremely important habitat feature for migratory birds and waterfowl and reptiles. So it's an important place. For a long, long time, this little narrow strip was breaching on a regular basis and causing impacts, letting the waves come right through and impact all this infrastructure. And so with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the federal government in the United States, they made a decision to go in. They started off between 75 and 1990 trucking sand, so annually placing 176,000 cubic yards of sand on this beach every year to keep the beach in the same place, to protect the assets. And then they made a switch in 1992, and they built a series of offshore breakwaters. So we look at this series of rock islands here, 55 of them, all the way around the outside of that sand spit to help hold the sand in place longer. Now they only have to nourish this beach artificially, and you see the trucks coming in and dumping sand on the order of 38,000 cubic yards per year, which is still a very large volume of sand for reference. Another important takeaway, though, from this, a couple important takeaways. First of all, this project started with a 50-year commitment by the federal government, right? This is not a one-off. This is not a let's do a project and then monitor. This is a 50-year, every year commitment. And once you start down the road of doing these projects, you cannot stop, all right? So it doesn't mean they're not good ideas, but I just want everyone in council and your worship to be aware that these are forever commitments that take significant, sustained funding, essentially forever, all right? Now, with respect to high bluff environments, there's some good examples on Lake Ontario, just to the east of Toronto in the Scarborough Bluffs area. So this is the high bluff environment. It's fairly similar to what we have in Chatham-Kent, where we have high bluffs, there are glacial sediments, they're eroding, we have infrastructure up top. Because of the need and the desire to build more parks in Toronto because of their growing population, the Conservation Authority in Toronto, the municipality largely, in the province to some degree, I've been moving forward these large waterfront parks. So they deal with this erosion hazard by building these large land masses at the base of these eroding cliffs. This structure extends out into the lake on the order of 100 meters. All right, so these are substantial projects. You can see them building this land base here and the rock structure out in front. So a significant investment here. These also require continuous maintenance, but they can be, this is an image from Google Earth, they can be very successful at stopping the erosion if built properly and fully invested on. And so this is the sort of post-project condition where these bluffs eventually stabilize and we have a public amenity at the base where we have waterfront trail. Very, very significant financial investment to do a project of this nature, but they are being done in some locations. I would also just mention that even these structures do require maintenance during high lake levels. Okay, so moving on to the last option here, retreat. So this is, again, is a concept that's been evolving. It hasn't been around conceptually as long as some of these others like armoring and the hardening, largely being driven by things around the world with respect to sea level rise. So there are places around the world where, because of the rate of sea level rise, communities are just accepting the fact that something else needs to be done. And so a couple examples, though, in Canada where this has happened. So in Alberta, after the 2013 flood, the community of High River, and that's the graphic here on the right, there was a decision. The council voted in favor of essentially declaring this area for redevelopment other than housing, right? The risks were simply too high, and the decision was made to change the land use in this area. In New Jersey, they have a very interesting program for floodplain, flood-prone lands. This is a voluntary program with federal funding where if you're flood-prone property, if you're at risk, if you want, the government will buy it from you, and they'll convert those lands back into recreational or conservation lands. So again, something that starts with a seed pot of money, and the federal government saying, in the US, we want to remove these flood-prone lands, these buildings and these people, so we'll buy your properties if you want to sell them to us, and then they convert them into either recreational areas or natural areas. And then in Montreal, again, just this spring, people have seen pictures and heard on the news where the government has been making offers. One of the options for the flood-prone people outside of Montreal is $100,000 for flood damages to repair their homes. That's a cap at $100,000 for the life of your ownership of that property, or an immediate $200,000 buyout. All right, so there are some examples where this approach of retreating and making hard decisions and changing land use, it's happening around the world, but it's also happening right here in Canada as well. And it's been happening in Chatham-Kent, as some will know, for a long time as well. And so here's a snapshot of a building, 1990s. This bluff failed catastrophically here. The home was on the edge. The building was on the verge of collapsing. At that time, there was a provincial program available. The owner was able to apply for those funds, and they moved that home. This is, again, 1990, almost 30 years ago. Moved that home from the edge of the bluff to where it is today. And today that building is now 30 meters still from the back of the edge of the cliff. So this business of retreat and moving back as an option is something that's not new, right, even in this community of Chatham-Kent. Okay, we're getting close to being done, and then I certainly welcome questions. What we wanted to do, hopefully that gives you a quick overview of the conversations we've been having at these important, very important community meetings. Some of the things we're talking about with the people as far as options. What can we do? Because we're hearing a lot about people about what should we do. As Bruce mentioned, 7 meetings to date, probably close to 500 people. But what I wanted to do for council here is just share some findings from you, because we've been asking people for feedback, exit surveys, et cetera. So we'll take you through some of that feedback. First of all, from the exit survey, this is the meetings just a couple weeks back. 67% of the people that filled out the survey live directly on the lake, and 13% of those people, the people there, lived within 1 kilometer. So with respect to your municipality at large, 80% of them were within a very narrow strip along the shoreline. So just want to set that context. And the map on the graphic on the right here, we had little dots where people were able to put their dots on where they were living. So you can see how a very significant number of the people that were at these meetings, of course, were the ones living along the lake. One of the things we asked people about was, how do you decide? What do you think about the evaluation criteria? And so some of the more prominent ones are highlighted there. 8% of the people said that the criteria when you evaluate options, we have to look at whether it can protect property. So that was by far the most common. 61% talked about the importance of permanence and durability. If we're going to make investments, it has to last. Right? 51% affordability for the landowner, 39% protection of human health, which I think is very, very critical. There was a whole bunch more in between, and then the last one there, 14% said affordability to the municipality. So threw that one out there, just again highlighting back to the fact that 80% of the people that were in attendance lived right along the lake. All right. We also, I think, generally have very positive feedback. Roughly 80% of the people said they're willing to come back and come back to future meetings and provide feedback. So we're very encouraged by that. But on for some general comments, again, setting some context. We heard a lot at all 4 of the last meetings. Hurry up, finish, get on with this. We need to move fast, right? Speed up. More political representation was highlighted from all levels of government. The workshop made people, again, very, very supportive of the format. We asked them to give us feedback, and they're very appreciative of that. Making it easier for landowners to secure permits, taking a systems approach to the solutions, not lot by lot. Short-term funding is needing, so is long-term funding. Some people mentioned that we are all victims of climate change. And what I thought was maybe one of the more important ones, leaving, and I was very encouraged by the amount of support that we received and the amount of cooperation, was the spirit to all work together. So the people of your community and some of the councilors that were there can attest to the fact that there was a very, very positive spirit to move forward to start dealing with some of these very challenging issues. All right, so we talked about mitigation options, and I shared with you the 4 that we've talked about. And just to highlight some of the feedback, again, on the open bluff, so the high bluff environment where the erosion is a primary concern. We used some software with Gabriel's help to generate a word cloud. So if you're familiar with word cloud, it simply looks for the commonality of certain phrases. And along that high bluff environment, the most popular approach, the recommendation from the attendees was retreat, was to move back out of the way. But the most important takeaway is that all options were highlighted as having some importance in some locations. On to a few quotations real quickly that I thought were really relevant and spoke to the nature and the tone in the meetings. We are all in this together. Actions in one area can negatively impact another. With respect to avoid, we all need to ensure new purchasers understand the risks of living along the shoreline. Under accommodate, we had some people come up and say, please tell me how to raise my house so I can get rid of these flood problems. Protect, again, this is another really insightful one. I'm helpless to protect my property if my neighbor doesn't protect theirs. All right, we all have to work on this together, and it's the reason we're talking about community scale solutions. Under retreat, retreat might be the only answer in some locations, was one of the feedback. Another was buy me out at fair market value, right? Short term, again, we need help. We want some action. Let's get on with it. Long term, the cheapest solution might be buyouts, not armoring everything. And as far as future meetings, again, another word cloud where we took all of the feedback and we put into a piece of software, and it's highlighting by the size of the text the most common phrases. And right there, screaming at us in the middle, is solutions. We need solutions. We need funding opportunities. We need more cooperation with other levels of government, permitting, emergency planning, etc. So lastly, here are some next steps. There's a meeting coming up, the AMO meeting in Ottawa. I'm sure everyone's well familiar, and some will be attending. And we're looking, staff here at Chatham-Kent are looking at a meeting with the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. So we're looking to secure that. We will continue to liaison with you, and we'll come back whenever you'd like us, all right? Open invitation to come back to talk to council anytime you would like us to. We are also planning a meeting with senior levels of government in September. We're actively working on this, the staff here at the municipality as well as Conservation Authority and ourselves. We need to broaden this message and get this out to all levels of government, and we're working very hard on that. We'll be back in the community to talk about more refined concepts specific to the different geographic regions here in Chatham-Kent, either in late September or very early October. And then we're working on a report that will provide a summary of this entire process, as well as the range of adaptation concepts and the types of feedback that the public stakeholders have for them. And more on an eternal note, we have to have all of our work on this funding opportunity finished by March 2020. So with that, Your Worship and Council, I'd like to thank you for listening, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions? Councillor Thompson?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you very much again, Peter, for the report this evening. I do have just a couple of questions, and some I did ask you when you were in ERIO, but some ideas don't die, no matter how tenacious. So, again, I asked you, are there any man-made lake level controls on Lake Erie?
No, there are no structures that affect the water level of Lake Erie. The water levels fluctuate naturally due to natural environmental factors on Lake Erie.
All right. And again, so I went back and told those individuals that, and they hit me with this. Can't we just open up the Welland locks?
Open up the...
Welland locks. You know the lock system there?
Sure, yes.
I had the same reaction.
Yes. So one thing that it's important, we're talking about community scale with our solutions here. With respect to water levels, first of all, the water levels in all of the Great Lakes are controlled by something called the Binational Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and there's also the Water Supply Agreement. So we balance, the federal government leads this with the federal government of the United States. We make balanced decisions based on both countries. So that one single country cannot act alone. But the other really important takeaway, when we start talking about water levels and managing water or moving it from one place or to the next, or one lake to the next, faster, for example, it is important to understand that while getting rid of some of Lake Erie's water right now would provide important relief, that would cause negative impacts to Lake Ontario. And Lake Ontario right now is also at setting records for lake levels. So if we were to move more water through the Welland Canal, excuse me, could provide relief for Lake Erie, it would make things worse on Lake Ontario.
Obviously. Okay, thank you. And then one scientific fellow came to me afterwards and said you didn't allow for, and I had to look this up, post-glacial rebound. Can you tell the audience? I know about it now, but can you tell me about post-glacial rebound and potentially how that impacts the Great Lakes system?
Yes, great question. So try to keep it fairly high level. Where we stand today in the entire Great Lakes Basin, about 12,000 years ago, was still covered in ice, close to 1 kilometer thick. So that's a really short snapshot in time when we consider the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So 12,000 years ago, we'd been squished in ice as we sit right here. So what's happened with isostatic rebound? The ice retreated north, generally, which meant that it stayed in the north longer than it did in the south. And so the weight of all that ice had an impact on the crust of the Earth, on the rock substrate, not the soils that we farm and we see with our eyes here, but the rock underneath. And so there's different rates of settlement of the Earth's crust because of that glacial ice. And as the ice retreats, it comes back. But it's coming back at different rates. So if you think about a sponge and you squished it, it bounces back. So the Earth's crust is still bouncing back. It's bouncing back at different rates north to south, and that essentially tilts the Earth's surface and it affects water levels.
But that really doesn't factor into our problem we're having today.
That, I would say, is not an important factor in where we're what we're
Okay.
talking about today.
So that kind of wraps up my questions on that aspect. One thing I did want to point out was this was strictly Lake Erie we're focusing on, right? Just the Lake Erie shoreline. But, I mean, Lake St. Clair water levels are going to remain high as well.
Yeah.
And we still have issues to deal with in Mitchell's Bay and even Wallaceburg, right?
Correct. Yes, so great question about geography. So we're talking obviously about Chatham-Kent here tonight. There are 4 case studies similar to this one. 2 of them are on Lake Ontario, the one here in Chatham-Kent, and then the 4th one, we're working with all conservation authorities in Ontario that have lake waterfront. So there's 4 studies being done. We did not specifically look at the geography of Lake St. Clair with the technical analysis, but I think there are lots of takeaways here. And without getting too far into that, you would expect Lake St. Clair to have less ice cover moving forward under a warming climate, which would mean more winter storms, for example, hitting that shoreline as well.
Okay. In the work you did, which was very, very good, and I really appreciate you coming tonight, you didn't address drainage schemes and how they could potentially be affected, drainage schemes that move into Lake Erie. Mm-hmm. Could you maybe just touch on how that could potentially be affected?
And be affected by the impacts of climate change?
Climate change and especially high water.
Well, I think the one thing with respect to the drainage schemes and this is already documented in the measured information, that we're getting more intense rainfall events. And we're also getting more rain. It rains more across southern Ontario now than it did 100 years ago. So moving forward with respect to drainage schemes, which is not an area of my expertise per se, but I would suggest that they would need to plan for a period of a future condition where it will have more intense rainfall events and also more rainfall events.
Okay. I don't know if you can go back quickly, and I guess you don't have to, but when you brought up the map of the erosion, the top of bank erosion, and talking about Talbot Trail there, while we're going back, there was the very first one I noticed, right on the top, was where we happened to close Talbot Trail last week. So your map there, and just for everybody's knowledge, that isn't so much, that is strictly measuring where the top of the bank is going to be, not a comment on the underlying rigidity or solidity of the bluff, right? Because on your map, you've got it, that's not going to disappear for 50 years, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to have issues prior to that.
Correct. That's a good point. Very good point, actually. So 50 years is the time frame that we drew the line, but because of uncertainty, it's a thick line, not a single, very fine line. But you're correct that the issues, of course, we're feeling them already, and you will continue to feel them. And so this is the value of working closely with your engineering department and making these types of projections, because you're feeling these challenges right now in certain places, and that's causing great hardship. But we need to understand how many more are going to pop up within the next short time horizon, and that I believe should be factoring into the decision-making process.
Okay. My final question would be going back to the, you put some dollars and cents to how many buildings and how much they could potentially cost, but you didn't allow, or you did, and it's a huge scope, but for the public infrastructure that's also in the ground.
Yep. Yeah, infrastructure, there's obviously utilities underneath the roads. We talked about at the public meeting, the vulnerability assessment took what we would call sort of the standard swipe at the main things, infrastructure, roads, buildings, et cetera. But there are many layers to vulnerability, including things that are under the ground. There are also social aspects of vulnerability too, and you can imagine the hardship that people are faced with every day when they go home and their backyard's flooded, or their septic system's not working, or they're watching their property erode. So you can add many layers to a vulnerability assessment. We made a decision to keep it fairly, take the standard approach with the most common things, largely because we thought that would do a good enough job at understanding where you have your highest areas of vulnerability. But also, and maybe most importantly, we want to make sure we keep enough resources in our plan to look at the solutions. So we heard loud and clear from the community at these meetings that hurry up, get moving, and start telling us what the solutions are. So we want to be very respectful of that. And so we want to make sure we put a lot of energy into looking at the full range of options.
Okay. I very much appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Councillor Harrigan?
Thank you. Also very much appreciated the information that you shared with us tonight. A question that I had is actually just in regards to how you referenced the timeline. So at one point you noted late century, and then in another you referenced to kind of 50 years down the road. But that was always followed up by assuming the current trajectory or assuming that impact to climate change isn't realized, right? Can you give comment or insight as to what the potential future could be, or how much current climate change can accelerate those potential estimates?
Okay, that's great question. So for those that have done some reading or even watched on TV often, so we're talking about the future and we're talking about climate, two very hard things to predict. And with this study, we are following the science with respect to how we expect the climate to change for what's called the high emission trajectory. Technically, it's RCP 8.5. But really what that means is it's sort of what the scientists, the community globally is using as sort of a worst case scenario for emissions. And that happens to be what we're doing today, continuing on indefinitely. It's also important to note that that's roughly what we're tracking too. So we haven't made globally substantial changes, so we are tracking the impacts of RCP 8.5, which is the high emission scenario. Now, there is an option out there in 60 years where we globally and locally as communities make a decision to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, make positive improvements. We have technology, et cetera. We all heard the news, where we could slow down these impacts. So when we talk about these findings in Lake Erie going to an ice-free condition in the future, I would say that is bracketed as one of the worst case projections. If we as a global community and local can make improvements, maybe this won't happen. But it's very hard for us to project the future. So that's one thing to sort of keep in mind. And we chose this route because we know what's happened already. We know that we have storms impacting these communities already. So we wanted to know how bad could it get from a planning perspective. So that's the reason we took this approach. With respect to time, and that time's important, I did show the maps that talk about where the erosion could be in 50 years, estimates of 50 years. That's using the historical rate of erosion. So if we look 50 years from now in the future and we keep staying on this trajectory we are with the high emissions and the lake ice keeps melting and being less present, we're going to lose all that land in a lot less than 50 years, right? So to put things in context in the public meeting, I think a couple times I mentioned all of the hazards you're facing now across this community are going to get worse. That's a guarantee, unfortunately. How much worse, again, depends globally on what happens with respect to emissions.
Okay, and I think, so what I'm hearing is, make no mistake, this is a here and now, this generation problem that we are facing.
This is right now. And one of the things with respect to ice, I don't think I mentioned specifically, but the ice cover on Lake Erie is already decreasing. So if we look at how much ice we had in the 70s and 80s, we're already measuring, quantifying change. So this is already happening. This is not a, well, if this and that happens, we're going to have less ice. We already have less ice on Lake Erie, so this process is already happening. So it's something that we're very confident on that.
Okay, thank you. And then just one other question more to staff through you, Mr. Mayor. Are we having conversations with the provincial government about the two provincial parks? Like, I'm less familiar with Rondeau, but the Wheatley Provincial Park, like, it loses trees and like at meters at a time in terms of the erosion rates. And I have people who are living, down Cemetery Road near the park who are basically watching the provincial park disappear before their eyes to erosion. Are we talking to our provincial counterparts about what can be done with erosion in provincial parks, or is that something that's just, it's too big of a problem? I'm hoping we're having some conversations.
Well, I'll just start by saying, and then maybe Thomas will add, we do have a steering committee, as I mentioned, that we meet with regularly. We have representation there from the provincial government with respect to parks. So we are having dialogue with them. So they're very familiar with this study. Again, I can't and don't speak for their decision-making process, but they treat their parks as natural areas, and they move very cautiously with respect to taking an engineered approach to the shoreline. So I think that's really all I should say, but we are definitely communicating with them. We will continue to do that. They're very aware of the study. We've been in both parks several times, and they're tracking what we're doing. Where's Thomas? Did you?
Thank you, Mayor. So we had a number of discussions related to Rondo Park, for sure. We have not talked much about Wheatley, but we are trying to engage more members along Chatham-Kent and along the shoreline. We have established a meeting in early September. In addition, I've sent a paper to AMO requesting a meeting with the minister to discuss all of our impact.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pincinel.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Peter. In your report, you said one of the favored options would be buyouts. Or that was one of the preferred ones on the list. If that did happen, who pays? Is that federal government, provincial government? Because obviously it can't be the municipal government.
Right. If I did say that was a favored option, it would have been a mistake, and I'm not sure if I did or not, but what we were trying to do with the one slide where we share some examples across Canada where there have been buyouts. And so Quebec, following the spring floods, is one case where the provincial government in Quebec came in and said, here is the deal we're willing to make. And I don't know the specifics of all that funding. So we're not, right now, as we sit here today, we are not at a place where we're endorsing one approach or the other. Okay. We're looking at all of those options from avoid, accommodate, retreat, and protect. And we will continue to look to the community to give us feedback on the different approaches.
Okay, follow up with that. Is there any history of that ever in Ontario? You're saying it happened in Quebec?
So if we turn back the clock a little bit, a real brief history here, we had high water level in the Great Lakes in the 1980s and 72, and the province did provide financial support to people that were flooded, for example, and had erosion hazards. And this would be my personal take on what transpired, but then the provincial government said if people just built outside of harm's way, we wouldn't have to keep bailing them out when we have floods. So this was the beginning of the regulations that the Conservation Authority worked so hard to implement, to build new homes outside of floodplains, to make sure new development is well back from the eroding shoreline. So there is some history there. It does go back more than 30 years where the government provided, for example, assistance with shoreline protection structures. There has been some other programs, but not large ones, and certainly there's not a sign-up sheet for communities to go to and say we're looking for financial assistance. So it's been less common, for sure, in the last couple decades. But as mentioned, we are planning this meeting in September with the provincial government and other members of senior levels of government. We want to have that conversation with them because it's been made very clear to us at the stakeholder meetings that that's a question you need to ask, and we are hoping that, this being the residents, that there are some help out there. I don't know if there's help, but we're going to ask those questions.
Okay. In the mid-80s, mid-90s, they had almost, the water levels were almost as high as they are right now. And then the 2 previous years, they significantly dropped. But do you think with climate change that's not going to happen this time around?
Great question.
I know you're not a mind reader.
Yeah,
but
so I really don't have an opinion on that as far as what will the future bring. You are certainly correct that previous highs in 72, 73, and 85. The lake rose quickly, stayed there, and retreated. Even people in Environment Canada are not making estimates for next year because, unfortunately, we don't know how much it's going to rain next year, and we don't know how much snow we're going to get. So there are forecasts with lake levels that can go out with a reasonable amount of uncertainty, and they go out 1 or 2 months. So until we get through a winter and we see how much snowfall we have, and then we get through a spring and we understand how much is raining, not until then, which would be next spring, will we have some idea whether this is a step to the high or this is the high and we might come back down. We simply don't know. So we have to plan for both options.
Yeah. Well, we did have an extremely wet spring.
Yes, we did.
I think probably the worst one I ever remember anyway. I received pictures from Ohio on the other side of Lake Erie, and they are having the exact same problems we are. And I know 3 or 4 years ago, Lake Erie did freeze almost completely over. We had that real cold winter, but I don't know. I'm hoping this is a cycle, and next year we have our water back to normal. Anyway, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Solomon?
Thank you, Worship. I have a couple questions, but just to follow up on those from Councilor Pinsino. It was about 6 years ago that we were worried, shoreline owners were worried that the water levels would drop so low that it was going to turn into a swamp in Rondo Bay and Mitchell's Bay, even worse. They had, I think it's fair to say, hundreds of feet of muck that you had to go through channels at Mitchell's Bay to get out to to get a boat out. And now it's quite the opposite. And I've seen those cycles up and down for 40 years. We seem to be at a high now, and maybe we're concerned more because we have this, there's a lot more information about climate change. One of the things that we were told back in 6 years ago was that there wasn't enough ice on the lake, same thing you're saying, but we were told that that caused higher evaporation rates. And because it caused higher evaporation rates, obviously when water evaporates, the water levels drop.
Yep. So very good point. In an ice-free winter, you will have more evaporation losses off the surface of the lake. Right. And so that's a negative to the water balance. Where the scientists are now that are working on this water level question, though, and where the future will go, are feeling that that is going to be more than offset by increased rainfall events. So it's a very important process, but we are also getting more rain. And the other point just to raise, and I echo your thoughts there, is that lakes levels are and always have been highly variable. There's data that goes back 4,000 years that shows these lake levels went up and down in the Great Lakes. And so what we want to do with this work is to have a community that's resilient to that full spectrum, right, of highs and lows. That's our goal, to be able to be resilient to both high and low lake levels.
So here's my second part. That's my micro question. The macro question is more this. Province of Ontario has 4 Great Lakes with long shorelines, extensive shorelines. So in preparing to come to this meeting, I read the Globe and Mail, I read the National Post, both on the weekend and today. I read a story about Perry Sound being inundated with water in this morning's business section of the Globe. I read about Cornwall at the other end of the, where if you did let the Welland Canal, water go through the Welland Canal, you'd flood all of Montreal. Then I read about Montreal, which is even worse off, far worse than we are. Cornwall the same. I do remember that Morrisburg on the St. Lawrence River was moved back. That was the retreating back in the 50s as part of
The dam construction.
yeah. So I look at it and I say, yeah, as a municipal council, we've got, a micro problem here, but the problem's so extensive that it's not something on the dollar side that we can even contemplate. I kept listening and I was getting more and more depressed and worried. But the answer to me is, this is not something we can handle. because I have looked at those shoreline protections in the United States, and you know, you could do that, but you got to have massive amounts of money. And the only place that has massive amounts of money is the Great Sucking Sound up in Ottawa, that takes it out of our pockets on a regular basis. We don't have that. We don't have those taxing abilities, right? It's municipal property tax, and that just isn't going to cut it with this problem.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering. I know all about the Shoreline Protection Act and how that worked, and people put jetties in and walls and that, and paid for it over time themselves. But I don't know how we deal with the greater problem that you've discussed, that is requiring extensive shoreline protection without federal funds. And I don't think it's, your scope of this study is a very small one compared to the entire shoreline of Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Huron. At Point Edward, right now, the marinas there are inundated with water. So that's the Lake Huron water. I just don't, it seems like a problem that without great amounts of federal investment is not possible to solve. I mean, as you say, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are the ones who addressed it in the United States. What's the Canadian solution? Because it's not a Chatham-Kent made solution.
So I'll say a few things. I think the fact that this is a very significant and large problem, I would agree with you 100%. I think that there's sort of, I would start with two things. One, we have the future, and this community will make decisions about the future. And my hope would be that you'll take the work that's done with this study and we'll learn from it. And the people that came along with us on the journey will remember what we talked about, and the staff, Conservation Authority will take that knowledge and continue to make good planning decisions in the future. So that's the easier part. What you described, though, as the biggest challenge is the current development. And I would agree there are enormous challenges that are going to require very creative solutions, and then there will need to be discussions about funding. Some things, though, could be more short-term and maybe less cost-effective, and then there are some that are surely very expensive endeavors. I would just suggest, and this is my opinion, looking across the landscape and sort of understanding how these things are done in the last 30 years. As we look to the future, municipalities are going to have to continue to take a leadership role because the province is not necessarily going to be there helping everyone. So I think the unique opportunity that Chatham-Kent has here is to be doing this study, because you're one of only 4 communities, and getting prepared for the future is a very important task.
Sounds like a very expensive task, too.
Very expensive too, yes.
Councillor Foss?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in response to Councillor Pinson's question regarding buyouts, back in the early 90s, Dresden was a participant in a floodplain acquisition program. At that time, they'd built the Darcy McHugh Dam to alleviate Wallaceburg's drainage or flooding issues, which wasn't really helping the town of Dresden. So we approached the province and said, you know, you're doing this for Wallaceburg, we need some relief as well. So that's how we got to participate in the floodplain acquisition. And I'm guessing that was probably in the early 90s. And I think that was after the 85, 86 flood that we had. So, and I think every 20 years prior to that, we were prone for flooding. And at that time, I believe the funding level was a 60-40% split, which we were able to do, and I don't think since that time we've had a flood in Dresden, so it seemed to have worked to some extent. So just those comments.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.
All right.
Item 12, deputations.
Thank you. Council, we have 3 deputations for this evening. I'll remind all the speakers that according to our procedural bylaw, you have a maximum of 5 minutes. Two of the items are on item 17B, which is the motion of Councillor Thompson regarding climate emergency, and the other one is with regards to item 13B3, which is the information of Chatham-Kent United Way campaigns. So our first speaker this evening is Barb Easter. Barb, I welcome you to the podium. On deck will be Steve Pratt.
Hello, Mayor Caniff and councillors. Thanks for allowing me to speak with you tonight. I've emailed and called most of you over the past week, so now you can put a face to my name. I'm a wife and mother living in Blenheim, Ontario, and I work remotely for a Canadian software company. My kids go to St. Anne's School in Blenheim, and my husband is a network and security manager at MBI Financial. So you can consider me a representative of my constituent demographic tonight. My husband and I were born and raised in Blenheim, myself to a small farming family, with parents who worked days at Bell Canada and Union Gas, and nights and weekends on the farm. We've been farming in Ward 2 near Mull, Charing Cross, and Shrewsbury for 3 generations. My husband and I have been taxpayers in Windsor, Hamilton, Brampton, Burlington, and Sudbury. We've been around, which allows me to say that CK is by far the best place to raise a family and earn a living. So we moved back home about 5 years ago. I'm going to compare tonight's motion to a telescope because they're similar. Just like the motion tonight, the telescope is simply a tool. We use the telescope to explore a place before we can get there, or to decide if what is there could be used here. The telescope is comparative. It helps us say, are happenings out there going to affect us here? And should we take that solution there and apply it here? The telescope is also proactive. It helps us find and navigate changes, dangers, obstacles, and challenges, and it allows us to plan. As we realize how CK affects the world and is in turn affected by the rest of the world, telescope thinking can help each of us make sense of it all. And that's what this climate emergency motion is, make no mistake. There have been more than a few instances of climate change impact at home here this year, have you noticed? And already we're struggling with how best to handle their effects while planning for the future. I'm talking about increased rainfall, shoreline damage, damage to transportation infrastructure, and number of heat warning days. Now, declaring a climate emergency is definitive. It signals to our community and to those considering moving here that CK leadership commits to advancing sustainability, resilience, mitigation, and adaptation for our assets, our resources, systems, and communities, while showing to the world that we're an economically attractive, proactive, and progressive community. The motion, by its wording, imposes a spare timeline and compels us to commit further human, strategic, educational, and financial resources to moving toward change in these regards. Councillors, it's no longer a question of believing in climate change. The question is, can we apply tools like this motion and its subsequent policies quickly enough and collaboratively enough as time grows short? I've been asked if this is a useless alarmist motion to tie up CK resources. No. The motion is the start of a municipality-wide holistic action plan that brings climate change to the forefront, but ensures that each issue is proactively managed by engaging and supporting our constituents based on a blend of sustainability, mitigation, and adaptation strategies. I've been asked if this motion was to send a signal to the feds or the province. No. The vast majority of our provincial and federal electorate live where there's too much commuting and not enough outdoor time to begin with. They're writing a check that us and our kids are on the hook for, and they're not particularly interested in signals from CK. I've been asked if I'm stupid, if I don't understand how seasons, lake levels, or climate trends cycle. Councillors, there's overwhelming scientific evidence that humans are negatively impacting the climate and that time grows short. I've been asked if I'm scared. No, I would be scared, however, for what I'll tell my kids and yours if it comes to light that we had the opportunity to further speak and act to defend their birthright, and we chose to say good enough in the face of mounting evidence that more is required of us. Many say that climate change is too broad of an issue to address meaningfully. I was raised to know that for big problems or confusing problems, all you need is the right tool, the right neighbor, and the right starting point to get some practical help. In this case, the tool and the starting place are the motion tonight, and the neighbor is you. So now it's your turn. I'm asking you to support the climate emergency motion tonight to align with the needs of your constituents. Thank you.
Next speaker is Steve Pratt on the report for United Way. Mr. Pratt is the Chief Executive Officer for United Way. On deck will be Simon Swanek and Rianne Recker.
How do we do the presentation?
And yours is this one?
Yep, you got it. And the video's at the end.
Is this one? Yeah, so then you can just click on that one.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Caniff, Council, and Administration. I was requested by Councillors Karen Kirkwood-White and Mary Claire Latimer to come to Council this evening to share some news around recent developments and new partnerships at United Way. To preface this update, I'd like to focus on a few key highlights of Administration's report to Council regarding United Way campaigns. Employees have requested the opportunity to exercise their philanthropic interests more independently, be able to take the lead on fundraising and charitable work in smaller teams. Options for payroll deduction and/or one-time donations are important, and employee engagement was higher when a staff-level internal champion was identified. The solution turned to be Chatham-Kent's employee charity chest, and that therefore it was established. In essence, the Charity Chest campaign mirrors the United Way campaign, including the choice to designate to any charity of choice through payroll deductions. The very fact that this internal charity chest was established clearly tells me that there were employee needs as a United Way that we were not responding to effectively. We know the way that people want to give and support their community has evolved with technology and rapid access to information, and it is time to move into the digital age. United Way has collaborated with Salesforce, the leading global technology solution developer, to provide the municipality of Chatham-Kent with a game-changing employee engagement platform. Salesforce Philanthropy Cloud is an intuitive, easy-to-use digital platform that ensures a personalized experience for employees based on their specified giving and volunteering interests. It's all tied into the municipality of Chatham-Kent's philanthropic campaign objectives as established by Council and Administration, CK Plan 2035 and strategic priorities such as impact on mental health and addictions or poverty reduction, and is even mapped to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The solution we will offer the municipality of Chatham-Kent is a beautifully branded, intelligent, and intuitive employee giving platform, year-round campaign management, and real-time access to personal, corporate, and community impact. It offers employees a variety of ways to give and administration best-in-class tools to gain clear insight into their workplace philanthropy culture. The platform also connects and matches employees with purpose-driven volunteer opportunities that fit their own unique convictions or interests, making it even easier to get involved in CK. The platform is branded as the Municipality of Chatham-Kent platform and is available 365 24/7. Through a partnership with United Way Worldwide and the United Way of Greater Toronto, we are pleased to be able to offer this state-of-the-art, best-in-class solution to our municipality at no cost, under the caveat that the municipality would continue to support an annual United Way campaign for 30 days of the year, leaving 335 days to focus on any other philanthropic community projects of council or administration's choosing. There is a meeting scheduled on July 3rd with Don Shropshire, Councillors Karen Kirkwood-White and Carmen McGregor, to explore this further to see if it would be a good fit for meeting the municipality's internal campaign needs. And now I have a quick video that shows this platform in action. Let's say there was a devastating flood in our community. This is potentially how the municipality could mobilize the caring power of its employees through using Salesforce Philanthropy Cloud to take the lead and respond. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. The last deputation tonight is Simon Swanek and Rianne Recker with regards to item 17B, the motion of Councillor Thompson, climate emergency.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, Mayor Caniff. I want to take a moment just to thank you all for creating some space for us to be here this evening. It's wonderful and very important for us as citizens to have the opportunity to speak to you. So thank you for having us here. My name is Simon Swanek. I'm 26 years old, and I've been a resident of Chatham-Kent here for the last 2 years, having moved here recently with my partner in order to start our business.
Hello, I'm Rianne Recker. I was born and raised in Chatham-Kent. I'm a proud wife, mother to a beautiful 4-year-old, and most recently a champion for environmental causes. You may recognize us as library staff, but we are here with you tonight on behalf of Zero Waste Chatham-Kent. We're a grassroots organization that is focused on waste reduction. We're inspired by sustainable practices, and we're motivated by developing strategies that connect our built environment to our natural environment. We stand here today in our green shirts with you, young business owners, mothers, active community members, seniors, youth, family, etc. And we are asking that you support Councillor Trevor Thompson's motion to declare a climate emergency in Chatham-Kent.
The municipality has made steps forward in recognizing the impacts of climate change on our region already, such as hiring an environmental planner, completing the shoreline study, and releasing a climate-related public health study this past February. We're looking forward, and we ask that this motion, in particular, lead to more coordinated action and mitigation across the municipality, with a focus on reducing our environmental footprint. To ensure the declaration goes beyond symbolism and truly inspires action, we ask that the motion be quickly followed by consultations with key community groups who have an interest in promoting and furthering environmentally sustainable efforts, coordinated and collaborative efforts across the municipality to build capacity and leverage our existing assets, adoption of a formal policy and procedure that directs staff to view potential strategies, policies, programs, and other actions through the lens of environmental sustainability, prioritization of effort to support those who, in our community, are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, coordination and collaboration with other levels of government, and identification of evidence-based ways that the municipality can address our impact on the environment and an evaluation of these initiatives.
We'll keep it short, but we hope that we've been able to signify to you with our presence here today that Chatham-Kent is a community that cares about our environment and our futures. We are a community that craves innovative environmental initiatives to help solve our local and ultimately global climate issues. Thank you for your time, Council and Mayor.
Thank you.
Item 13, consent agenda. Any items to remove from the consent agenda and place aside for consideration and debate separately? Councillor Solomon?
Thank you, Your Worship. 13, it's 13B2.
Councillor C. McGregor?
13B3.
Councillor Kirkwood White?
Thank you, Your Worship. Item number DI, or D1, sorry.
D1.
The minutes.
That's okay. Anything else? Can I get a motion to accept all others? Councillor Finn, seconded by Councillor B. McGregor. Any other questions? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, we'll go Councillor Solomon, 13B2.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a very few questions on, this is the request I made some time ago to get the International Plowing Match Statement of Operations, both the provincial group and the Chatham-Kent Plowing Match, Inc. And really, I've got very few questions, and I don't know who I'm going to address them to. You as the chairman, or?
Between Ms. Hoffman and myself, we can answer any, high-level questions. If you want to get any details about the financial numbers, we'll have to bring in the treasurers from those organizations and the OPA president to answer specific questions, but you can fire away.
Well, I'm only interested in the statement of operations from the Chatham International Plowing Match, Inc., so I don't think I need anybody from the OPA, but
Okay.
there's just a couple things I didn't understand, and one of them was the financial statements showing a receivable from Celebrate Ontario, and then in comparing the other financial statement, I can see the OPA has a large Celebrate Ontario grant that they get, and I just wondered, it shows a receivable of $46,911 receivable to the Chatham-Kent IPM, Inc. Who can answer what that is?
What that is a transfer. That's on the OPA side, it would be a payable of $46,000 and receivable over to the local. So I believe that's been transferred over subsequent to that.
That's what, I knew what the other part was. I just wanted to know whether it had been transferred over. It has.
I believe it has, yes.
Okay. And the only other thing I didn't understand was the, under IPM expenses, corporate partners, which shows as both a revenue and an expense. I understand the revenue, corporate partners, assumably A, donated, or B, got paid for booths. So that's revenue, but I don't understand the $40,765 expense. And that's okay, if no one can answer it tonight.
Yeah, I can give a generality of it. I mean, there's certain things that with like the corporate partners, they come in with packages and say, okay, we'll sponsor you 50 grand, 25 grand. So there's certain things included in the benefits thereof that would have some costs. So those costs there would be identified. So of the 560,000, there was 40,000 of costs to fulfill the obligations to the sponsors.
And what is the next line, administration? 40,658. There's no detail of it, but perhaps you can tell me what it is.
It would be the 80, I couldn't tell you the specifics in there. It would be a whole bunch of items rolled into that.
Why don't, can someone get me that at some?
Sure.
I don't want to take the time up tonight doing it, but.
Yes, we can follow up and have that detail sent out, what administration is.
Well, yeah, I can either send it out by email or you can report, somebody can report it at the next meeting. So the public the only, I'm doing this not out of my pure interest in plowing matches, but because the public has asked these questions. And the last one was the volunteers. It seems to be an expense also. Does that mean volunteers were paid, or does that mean it's an expense for shirts or hats or something?
That would be shirts, that would be the thank you party, all those other things, but no, there's no volunteers paid.
Thank you party is on here as a separate thing, I think, but anyway. Okay, if I can just get that other answer, that'd be terrific.
Okay,
Thank you.
and will you put a motion for it to accept? Oh, sorry, Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. When you're sending that additional information out, could you also provide a list of the charitable donations that made up the $104,000 as well?
Certainly, yes,
That
we can do
wasn't
that.
included in the,
Yep.
thanks.
Ms. Hoffman?
Thank you, Worship. I think we did already provide that information, but we can make sure that that's included in it as well. And maybe two other points or three other things just to share with you before you receive this report. I do have a handful of the glossy color copies of the annual report in the event that anybody wanted to browse through those instead of the black and white version, or in case there's anybody who perhaps wanted to get a copy of this and hadn't already. In my last report, well, this report is about the OPA local committee's financial statement, something that we weren't involved with. As you know, we provided this at the request of council, but the last report that I brought forward to council on the particulars of the municipal portion of the event, there were two outstanding items by way of receipt of income. One was a sponsorship from Tech Savvy for $25,000, and that has been received since our last report. And the last item is one more outstanding expense from the OPA local committee to pay for the fire and emergency services expenditure for service. And I have spoken with our colleagues that were on the local committee side, and they have the payment in process as we speak, and we should be receiving that fairly expeditiously.
Councillor Solomon, can you have a motion to?
Yes, subject to getting that information, I'd move the report be received.
Seconded by Councillor Latimer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor. First off, I would like to thank Ms. Hoffman for providing this report and with the data and information. It was great to have Steve Pratt here tonight to also bring information that we will be looking at further in the very near future. So, but based on this and based on the data that was presented, definitely showing that there was an increase of participation and amounts based on loan reps that were within the municipality over the past years between 2000 and 2018, and all the rest of the information in this report. I would like to bring a notice of motion regarding this. May I be allowed to do this now, or would you like it under?
Yes.
Okay. So I would like to give notice of motion. I, Councillor Carmen McGregor, hereby provide notice that I will bring forward the following motion at the August 12th, 2019 council meeting for discussion and voting, that a loaned representative be granted to the Chatham-Kent United Way campaign for the municipal portion of the 2019-2020 campaign, and that this also be referred to the budget session for future years. Thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, can I have a motion to accept?
Yes, thanks.
Seconded by Councillor B. McGregor. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. Referring to the council meeting minutes of June 10th, under item number 18A, there was a reference to Councillor Harrigan noting that the deputation from United Way outlined a partnership model between the Chatham-Kent Nonprofit Network and the United Way in lieu of the fact that the CKNN had acquired a Microsoft grant and there was an offer made to the municipality. There was a motion passed that the report be referred to administration for further consultation with the United Way on the acquisition of this free software. And I wondered whether there might be an outcome from that deliberation that you could give us an update on?
I have had a conversation with United Way staff, our Tom, our primary contact, and I believe the information that was shared tonight by Steve, my understanding is that would supersede what we've used previously in terms of some of the software. Like this program is the first time I'd actually see this software today, unless I'm misinterpreting your question, I'm sorry.
I think it's a different software package.
It was very
for-
different, but I
for
thought,
no, the software that was referenced in the last set of minutes was for grants, not for donations. So,
I do not have any further information on that right now.
Okay, maybe
I'll
you
have to
can-
look into that and get back to you, Councillor.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions related to that? Councillor Kirkwood-White, can I get a motion? Seconded by Councillor Finn. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Number 14, notice of motion. Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I, Councillor Brock McGregor, hereby provide notice that I'll bring forward the following motion at the August 12th Council meeting for discussion and voting. Whereas community partners and stakeholders throughout Chatham have been engaged and continue to work on assessing and addressing the societal, familial, and human impacts of substance use in Chatham-Kent, and whereas it is estimated that injection drug use in Chatham-Kent is up to 4 times greater than the national average, and whereas crystal methamphetamine use and related harms remain prevalent, and whereas rates of hospitalizations and emergency department visits from opioid poisoning continue to trend upwards, and whereas issues associated with substance use in Chatham-Kent significantly impact municipal services, including fire and emergency services, policing, building development services, and employment and social services. Therefore, administration be directed to report on next steps to update and implement a municipal drug strategy in partnership with local agencies and stakeholders, including options for resources required for a municipally led drug strategy, and that the report return to council prior to department's planning and finalizing 2020 budgets.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor. I have a notice of motion that may need 2/3. Do you want me to read the entire motion first, or would you like me to give a briefing to know?
Let's read the motion. Yeah,
Okay.
we need to read the motion.
Okay. I, Councillor Carmen McGregor, hereby provide notice that I am bringing forward the following motion at tonight's July 15th, 2019 council meeting for discussion and voting. I'm requesting that the notice period for this motion be waived, which will require a 2/3 vote for approval. Whereas Otter Creek Jam Fest is a new event for the community of Wallaceburg, which is bringing Juno Award-winning talent and local musical acts to the community, and whereas a portion of the proceeds from Otter Creek Jam Fest are going towards various charities and community groups, including the Kidney Foundation of Canada, Wambo, the Knights of Columbus, Kinsman, Sydenham Challenge, Dragon Boat Festival, and others. And whereas thousands of people are anticipated to attend Otter Creek Jam Fest, both for Chatham-Kent and outside of its borders, bringing commerce into the community. And whereas Wambo is an annual event that attracts thousands of people into the community of Wallaceburg, and whereas Wambo provides an opportunity for the number of community organizations and businesses for additional promotion and fundraising opportunities. Therefore, be it resolved that both Otter Creek Jam Fest and Wambo receive financial and in-kind municipal services at the same level as provided to the RM Retrofest and other municipal events for the 2019 season. Furthermore, that staff provide 2 reports, one outlining details and recommendations, including financial and in-kind municipal services for Otter Creek Jam Fest, and 2 outlining details and recommendations, including financial and in-kind municipal services for Wambo. These reports should follow the same format and level of detail as the RM Retrofest report approved by council at the April 29th, 2019 council meeting. These reports will be completed and presented to council for the August 12th, 2019 council meeting. And furthermore, staff be directed to begin preparations for the 2020 festival and event season and beyond, which will provide criteria and guidelines for municipal support, both financial and in-kind, for all similar types of events moving forward. And I do apologize for this coming forward at this meeting. However, both events will have taken place by the time we return to this table on August 12th.
Councillor B. McGregor?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I have what I suspect is a friendly amendment to the motion, and I've sent it to Merit Authority, and it's replacing after therefore. It says, therefore be it resolved that administration provide a report outlining options for in-kind and financial support for Otter Creek Jam Fest, Wambo, and Festival of Nations in line with that provided to RM40 Retrofest, accounting for event scale. So that's functionally just adding in Festival of Nations and asking for a report that outlines the types of things that we contributed to another event and accounting for the size or scale of those events when looking at funding options.
Are you okay with that amendment?
Yes.
Okay, so before we debate this, we need to determine, if you want to bring it on, we need 2/3 support to take it forward tonight. Otherwise, it just becomes a notice of motion to be dealt with the next meeting. Councillor Hall?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. For this motion that Councilor McGregor is bringing forward, I'm going to declare a conflict of interest under Section 10 of the Code of Conduct. I'm a board member for both of these organizations.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so proceeding on then, we need to look at, is there any other questions related to the 2/3? Do we need a seconder for? Okay, Councillor B. McGregor, second. Any questions related to specifically 2/3, just bringing it on the table tonight versus next month?
So council, just so you're aware, we require 2/3 vote. There are 16 people, therefore we require mathematically 11, I believe.
Councillor C. McGregor, anything you'd like to add before we vote for the 2/3?
No, I think that maybe everybody can understand that, and regardless, this report will come back on August 12th. It's just the necessity that anticipated that, you know, both these events will happen prior to the August 12th date. I would have preferred, and it was required that a notice come forward tonight, so I would, I guess I just wanted to prefer to be here. I would have preferred to have had the information that I had a month ago so that I could have brought it forward then for tonight's meeting. However, that didn't happen, so I would appreciate the ability to be able to discuss it around the table tonight.
Okay, seeing no other questions about that, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 12-4 and therefore required, or has covered the 2/3, so we can bring it to the floor now.
Okay, now that we're going to vote on it tonight, back to you, Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you. These events that are coming up in Wallaceburg are extremely large scale and present very much to all of Chatham-Kent the same advantages that have happened with many others, including like in the Festival of Nations, I know is already passed. So there is, you know, there's been different and many of our community meetings where we are working within in all of our community groups and looking on ways that we can help these events and help them within our community. You've been a very excellent, Mayor Caniff, at going out and talking with all of these groups and looking for ways for us to be able to help them to move forward so that we can keep these great events within our community. And this is one way that we can do it. And it's not that I'm setting precedents here. We have done this with other groups within the community of Chatham-Kent. And so I would like to see this move forward tonight. And be able to do this for the other 3 festivals that we've mentioned here. I do understand, and I think it is really necessary. I do understand they are working on a document to come and set criteria, which I truly feel is a very good thing, which is one of the requests within this motion, because I think for moving forward for 2020 that in our festival and events that we need to be able to have a criteria that all of council can work with so that we're fully understanding when we're talking with all of our community organizers and event organizers, that we're all on the same page and we all have the same method of sharing our information. So there's no confusion as to you know, what's happening or where or how we're spending money and helping these events within our communities.
Councillor B. McGregor?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just a comment of clarification. In the initial motion, it asked for the report back at the August meeting. So if we could include the report to return to the August 12th meeting in this motion, I think that would be helpful.
Councillor Latimer?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want clarification. This is a report, correct? It's not saying we're providing monies, or we're not intimating in any way to these organizations that they're going to be getting financial support and or in-kind support. I'm just asking for clarification.
Councillor C. McGregor, you want to clarify that?
The initial report here was asking for that in-kind service, but it is my understanding that a report is coming forward that is going to outline these at the August meeting. So,
it'll be after.
It will be after the fact, yes.
So
for all three.
So they would it would recommend monies be provided to them
And that will come,
after the
that will
fact?
come back to this council table again in August, okay? For further discussion.
All right.
Councillor Bondi, then Mr. Shropshire.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Did either one of these organizations come to the municipality and ask for funding before this? Just seems kind of late.
I think it has, sorry, through the mayor, respectfully through the mayor, it has arisen through the community meetings that we have held in going and offering to try and help these events and where they're struggling. So it has come with recommendations that they approach the municipality and present the municipality with budgets and projected expenses that they've either struggled with or projected for future events. The Otter Creek Festival is a new festival, and so there is not a past budget schedule for them other than the organizers on this committee have worked with very many of these events, so they understand what the issues they may be facing at bringing this event into the community. And I think through our community meetings, it was stressed that, that we as a community want to support our events, especially especially all of our events, but understanding the significance within our communities for the size of these events, for some particular events, such as RM and Retrofest, Festival of Nations. Wambo brings in, tens of thousands of people in the community. So it was basically derived from our community meetings when we met with these event organizers and asked them how could we help them make their events better, to bring more people and better events, like increase the events within Chatham-Kent.
So the answer is no, they didn't come to the municipality?
Yes, they have. Since we were in our community meetings, they had submitted information, yes, to the municipality.
And the municipality said?
Which I didn't realize at that point in time, or I would have made a motion a month ago.
But did they get an answer from the municipality?
I don't believe so. It wasn't until last week that it was realized that there was not an answer presented there. So it was requested that a motion be made.
I can clarify that all three had come and talked to us, but we didn't want to do one-off, so we said, let's put them all together. Let's look at them collectively and compare them, because they're all different events, but we wanted to put them in one package as opposed to going off and look at one, and then next council meeting, look at another. So that's where we were, was let's put them together. And the timeliness of it isn't as much as I would like to, given that it'll be after the events happen versus before.
That's what just sort of strikes me as somewhat unusual, that a report outlining a financial contribution from the municipality will come after all three, or at least two of these events are over. Don't event organizers typically come to the municipality, ask for a certain amount of money, maybe not be given all of it, then base the production on the available financing? Isn't that the way it should work?
Yes, next year, that's the way it's going to work.
Okay,
So
next year.
that's where we want to get a policy in place, so every organization knows that this is our new policy moving forward for small events, big events, and everything. And so that policy's coming, and I'll pass over to Mr. Shropshire. He's got some things to add to that.
Thank you, Worship. So when council last discussed the partnership fund, there was a number of different issues that were seen as requiring further investigation. I made a commitment to council at that time that administration would go back, restudy it, and try and get back to council either this summer or earliest the early fall to try and come back with some recommendations as to how we could update the program. So we're actually working on that. We're trying to actually have the report available for council in August. I've got a staff person that has some mandatory leave that has to be taken. If we can get it done by next week, you'll have it in August, not later than September. And if I can, Councillor Kirkwood-White, I finally caught up to your question about the software. The intent was there was software that was we were planning on recommending be funded and maintained through our public library. So anybody that was interested in acquiring or accessing grants from other institutions, be it the Trillium Fund or whatever, would have free access to that. So it was a matter where at one point we thought we might be able to do that through the United Way or possibly through the library. And unfortunately, Amy's not here to confirm where we're at with that question, but that was one of the options. So you are expecting to receive a report. We are looking at trying to revamp with some of the additional information to deal with some of the other special events. And as we discussed earlier this year, we've been doing this on the fly with a new committee structure and a new evaluation process. So we are playing a little bit of catch up this year. The council will have recommendations to consider, if not at the next meeting, not later than September, in terms of how all these would be dealt with. So yes, it's unusual to have it come in hindsight, to have a request be funded, but that's council's prerogative.
Right, so are we approving, if we approve this, the same level of financing that the municipality and in kind to the RM Retrofest thing for these three?
My understanding is if council approves this, you're giving us direction to go back and write the report that will come back to council for your approval. You're not giving me money, you're not giving me an approval to write a check tonight. All you're doing is giving me direction to come back to you with a report, and I'll provide the report in the same sort of details as was provided for RM.
So my
That's what I'm
question-
understanding your direction is.
My question then would be, to the organizers of these events, what if council says no? They've already spent the money, like the event was last week, right? I'm not trying to nitpick the thing, it's just, it does seem odd, right? That,
Yes,
you know, you
and
spend the money, then you ask to borrow
it
it.
is very odd, and I think when these meetings happened with these community groups, they had sent their information through. I think it was, and I'm not sure where it happened, but obviously it was missed that these dates are going to surpass our next meeting. But through conversation, if we're going to look at one, we should also be looking at the other one that took place in Chatham. So my motion originally, as it was a friendly amendment from Councillor B. McGregor, my original motion was for the two that are going to take place between now and the next meeting. But yes, and we had discussed it, and if we're going to look at this, then we should also look at Festival of Nations in the same manner, and also get that report moving forward for 2020, so that all of these events, that we have a criteria set for these events, and that going forward, we use that method with all of the community groups, all the event groups.
Yeah, I've got a long list of speakers here. So I've got Councillor Thompson, followed by Councillor Solomon.
Thank you. I think I've got my head wrapped around it, so I'm going to
withdraw at this point.
Councillor Solomon?
I may have my head wrapped around it, but I'm not going to withdraw. The second paragraph I fully support. I do think you need, if you're going to do this, you need a full report setting out proper criteria. As someone once said a meeting or two ago, you can't compare apples and pineapples. When you have a once-in-a-generation festival, it's not the same as an annual festival. So I'm hoping that administration will be looking at these things in that light. I also think that we're opening a door for, I won't get them all, but I'll start with the Thamesville Threshing Festival. The Shrewsbury, if they're above water, Jazz, is it just Blues Festival? Jazz and Blues and Ribs Festival. I won't get them all, but that's what you just opened the door to. And I think that's only fair. If you do it for one, you've got to consider all of them and put the right criteria. But I also agree with Councillor Bondi. It's more than strange that it comes after the event. It's just wrong. You set up your budgets and then you plan your event based on the amount of money that you're going to expend. And if they planned them not to have any funding because they didn't have any, then it's next year. And I don't have a problem with next year once there's criteria. I don't have a problem with that at all. It's just that we need to have criteria. We need to have staff input. I gladly vote for the second part, but I certainly can't on the first part. That's just doesn't make sense to me.
Councillor Pincinel, followed by Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with pretty much everything the previous speaker said. My question is this event for profit or non-profit? It's an outdoor concert. Is it?
The event is not a not-for-profit group, but all profits are being donated, afterwards are being donated to the list of charities that I mentioned before.
Okay.
So is anybody making money from it and pocketing it afterwards? No. The monies raised will go to the charitable events that were listed.
Okay. Everybody has one of these events. Bothell's coming up with a big one here in the same period of time, and you know what? We have to stop spending money so freely. You know what? I don't think I would have put my hand in the air to add money to that grant system if we were just going to pick away at it every month like this. I know this event's been advertised for probably 8 months or so, and they had time to go through the whole grant process. Whether something fell through or it didn't meet the criteria, I don't know. But I do agree with the putting a process in place. And as Councillor Solomon said, I'd like to see those two split. Furthermore, staff be directed from that be the second question. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kirkwood-White, followed by Councillor Foss.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. There were a number of councillors that were commenting about this particular motion or draft motion this afternoon. And my comments echo those of many of the other councillors that have already spoken. I was initially concerned about where do we draw the line for community special events and fundraisers. Do we ask for projection of attendance numbers as one criterion for financial support and in-kind assistance from municipal staff, or anticipated revenue? Because I'm sure that many groups who struggle with volunteer recruitment would appreciate and very much welcome the assistance of municipal staff, including fire and police and special events coordination, marketing and promotion, and recreation services as an example. So knowing full well that the Community Partnership Fund changed its format this year, We're anticipating that with a thorough conversation about the pros and cons and things that went right and things that went wrong, that we can put some really firm criteria in place for organizations that are having one-offs and/or annual events that will require similar support from the municipality. And that's why we put the money in the pot in the first place. So by the time we do the call for proposals next time, we'll hopefully be in really good shape.
Councillor Foss?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I guess a couple of things come to mind. We have an event coordinator, and this event has been probably advertised for a year, and I'm sure that the event coordinator should have been involved if he wasn't involved, just to give this group some direction as to the process, the opportunities that need to take place, and sort of get the direction that they need to put this event on. Not that I'm not going to support this, I am going to support it, but I do feel that that there needs to be some more communication instead of coming here at the last minute trying to put this type of a program together. We go back to the policy of community partnership funding and how we administrate that. And by going in this direction, we're just going sort of a willy-nilly type process in selecting where we're going to donate these funds. I'm very supportive of community projects like that, and that's why I'm supporting it. But I think in the future, we definitely need to be a little more hardline as to how we administrate these funds. I guess one other question I have for this year, the in-kind services that they're going to need, are we going to automatically do that and charge them for it? And then if the motion gets passed in August, September, will we be reimbursing them for those costs?
Yeah, that would, as we proceed on, yes, right now, there's a bill, they've gotten quotes, like the Festival of Nations has already been charged for various things. And so the same with so those charges go on. We have to say afterwards in September when the report comes back, if it recommends that, yes, we forgive those, then they would reverse back. Councillor Latimer?
Through the mayor. I am very frustrated with this. I support community partnership. I think through this whole process, it started with well intentions with the council. We went out to our meetings, but I do know that we communicated what was perceived is that the municipality would support these groups, and in many cases they received the message, you'll hear from us, you'll get help for your in-kind, for your police, your fire. Yes, don't worry, you'll get the money. Put the application in. In one case, for a particular organization in South Kent, they did go ahead and have their event, and it truly was in peril. They actually didn't receive the money. So we passed another motion, we took care of that. We're doing this again. I'm with Councillor Foss. You can't keep doing that. And I think it all boils down to the fact we put the buggy before the horse this year because we wanted to change the Community Partnership Fund and how we administrated it. Everyone has good intentions. I will support this based on the fact that we had, when it was with my ward, I had to support it because it's already happened. I don't like it. I'm with Councillor Foss. We need to clean up our act, and the second part of this motion allows us to do so. We also need to remember that we can vote down. We're not saying that we're going to give them the money in 2 weeks when we have our meeting. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying we should, but we had to remember that. But the intent of the motion is what I will be supporting.
I'm just going to add, I've seen no other questions, want to add a couple of things. I view this as a very much a one-year thing, that we will have full policies in place, and I don't expect this to be happening next year or any year thereafter. This is a whole brand-new thing to us, so we're looking at this, and I can speak from working with Festival of Nations, for instance. I mean, they set their budget, like Councillor Solomon said, set their budget, set their revenues. All of a sudden, municipality came in and said, oh, you need to spend $8,000 on a fence. You need to do these things. You need all this extra those things that they didn't budget for. So those were costs incurred by them. Their budget was nearly $200,000, and right now municipality kicked in $5,000. It was completely free event. So right now we're asking everybody else privately to say, you kick in $195,000 and we'll kick in $5,000. So that's the premise of like the Festival of Nations, for instance. I don't know as much detail on the other two events, but that's what we're going to be looking at conceptually moving forward. But that's just for this year. That's why I emphasize that next year I fully expect there'll be a policy in place so it's very clear for every organization that applies what criteria they meet, how much funding they're eligible for. So, any other questions? Seeing none, have we broken it into two parts? Okay, so we'll vote on the first part.
All votes are in. Motion passes 11-5.
We'll vote on the second half part now.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0.
Item 15, tender awards.
Item 15A, single source.
No other notice of motion? It's confirmed. Okay. Go ahead, Don.
I was keen, Your Worship. I was keen. Item 15A, single source tender award contract T19-110, road crack cleaning and sealing.
Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor Finn.
I'll second it.
Any questions? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Scotchy.
Just a quick question in regards to why this was a single source tender. Is it, yeah, just want some clarification on that.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. There's only one bid that was received for this contract.
Is that because, though, that there's not a lot of companies that are in this this field? I'm just kind of want a clarification, because normally when we see these types of large-scale tenders, that we see at least 3 or 4, unless it's very specified. So I was just curious to see, is this something that's very unique, where there's not a lot of companies that are involved and very specific to this type of work, or is it just something that with the logistics of the tender was difficult to meet?
So historically, we typically only receive 1, maybe 2 bidders on this type of contract. It is the one in particular bidder did not choose to participate in this year's contract for reasons unknown, obviously. But we are going to be looking at different alternatives or different tendering alternatives or measures to hopefully attract more companies, because we are aware of other companies such as for the crack cleaning and sealing type of projects in our neighboring municipalities. There are other contractors out there that perform this type of work, so trying to leverage them and engage them, find out what their, I guess, how to work with them a little bit better for future contracts.
And then just my last point, just because it's such a large contract, what did the staff, like Chatham-Kent staff, do to quantify that, to make sure, like, did you guys look at outside neighboring municipalities to ensure that we're paying something that's within the specifications of the content, like that we're not being, not, and I say this respectfully, it's just that when you have one person for such a large tender, like, is this something that you guys look at to make sure that they're within, whether you're talking construction or bricks or whatever you can say per thousand or square foot, is this something that you guys quantify to ensure that we're within our realm of costing?
So we typically just go back to like previous tenders in previous years, just to, I guess, to justify the bid that was received, and that's how we basically put out our tenders and how we estimate for the project. So they are in line. They were just slightly above from previous years, but they are in line. We haven't followed up with any neighboring municipalities, and that's, of course, something that we can reach out to them, because they do perform similar contracts such as this. That is not a hard ask to go out and find that information.
I appreciate that, and I do support you contacting the other companies as well, because it's nice to have at least a selection to see that, you know, those parameters being set that are, you know, close or far away, right? So thank you very much for that.
Yep.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 15B, tender award contract T19-270, Prince Albert Road over Arnold Creek Culvert replacement, community of Chatham Township.
Councillor B. McGregor,
I'll move the recommendation.
Councillor Kirkwood White.
I'll second.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 15C, tender award contract T19-271, Little John Road over McCollum Drain Culvert replacement, community of Orford.
Councillor Pinsino,
Thank you, Worship. I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor Wright.
I'll second that.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 15D, tender award contract T19-243, Campbell Road over Gan Drain, fifth concession line over Campbell Side Road Drain concrete culvert replacements.
Councillor Harrigan.
I'll move the recommendation.
Councillor B. McGregor.
I'll second.
Any questions? Seeing none, put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 15E, contract award T19-304, Ridgetown Public Works Garage.
Councillor Pinsino.
Thank you, Worship. I'd move that the tender amount of $2,050,837, including HST, for the work associated with T19-304 Ridgetown Public Works Garage be awarded to Agra Urban Building Incorporated, and two, that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the necessary agreements.
Councillor Wright.
I'll second that, Worship.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 15F, request for proposal award R18-476, municipal property tax software.
Councillor Kirkwood White.
I'll move the recommendation.
Councillor B. McGregor.
I'll second it.
Questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 16, Finance, Budget, and Information Technology Services.
Item 16A, 2018 audited financial statements.
Yeah.
Your Worship, I believe, yes, Mr. Brown is going to
You can do a presentation.
provide a brief presentation overview of the audited financial statements.
Oh, darn.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Tonight, I'll be providing you with a brief overview of our 2018 audit financial statements. 2018 was the first year of our five-year contract with Deloitte for the municipality's annual audit. Chatham-Kent received an unqualified audit opinion, meaning that Deloitte has concluded that our financial statements present fairly the results of the company's operations and its financial position, according to generally accepted accounting principles. During tonight's presentation, we will provide a brief overview and items of interest on our financial statements, including debt, reserves, accrual versus cash accounting, along with our financial position. Chatham-Kent's consolidated financial statements consist of 5 fully consolidated boards and commissions, including the Library, Police, the Public Utilities Commission, Public Health, and Drainage, along with 2 business entities, which are Integris and WDC Rail. In accordance with the Public Sector Accounting Board, the consolidated financial statements must include the following 4 statements. The statement of financial position, which is also known as a balance sheet. It includes a listing of the municipality's assets, liabilities, and accumulated surplus. The statement of operations and accumulated surplus, commonly referred to as our income statement, which includes the municipality's income and expenses for the year. The statement of change in net financial assets, which includes the capital asset transactions, as well as changes in other financial assets. And the statement of cash flows, which is simply a record of our sources of cash. On the statement of financial position, we have highlighted that in the fall of 2018, the municipality purchased $30 million of principally guaranteed pooled investments with CIBC. These investments have a staggered maturity date over the next 7 years. Effective January 1st, 2018, the Municipal Act was amended to allow Ontario municipalities to register a certificate of tax arrears after 2 years instead of 3. The municipality of Chatham-Kent has implemented this practice as of January 1st, 2019. Prior to this change coming into effect, the municipality used various avenues to educate property owners of upcoming changes, causing an increase in payments, which started to bring down our taxes receivable. In 2018, our accounts receivable balance was down roughly $10 million, which was due largely to the interfund balance with Integris. The municipality and Integris have an agreement in place where Integris will collect water and sewer rates on behalf of the municipality, and municipality will collect hydro payments on behalf of Integris. Both Chatham-Kent and Integris have worked together to reduce Integris' outstanding balance. Also in 2018, we had a $10 million decrease in our long-term debt, which I'll go over in the next several slides. The municipality's long-term debt outstanding at December 31st, 2018 totaled $76.7 million. Of this, $43.9 is associated to the Public Utilities Commission, and the debt payments are funded through water and sewer rates. Of the remaining $32.8 million, $18.2 is covered by senior government funding. This leaves $14.6 million, which is funded by the general tax base. This equates to roughly $140 of tax-funded debt per resident of Chatham-Kent. As you can see in this graph, the municipality continues to pay down our debt, reducing our debt load from $161 million in 2010 down to $77 million in 2018. If the municipality does not incur any new debt, this will be further reduced to $57 million by 2020. The Public Utilities Commission debt is represented in blue. It has decreased from $89 million in 2010 down to $44 million in 2018. The municipal general tax base and other senior government-funded debts, represented in green, has decreased from $72 million in 2010 down to $33 million at the end of 2018. This graph depicts the trend in the reserve balances. It is reflective of our net contributions to reserves, which are the contributions into reserves less the use of those same reserves. In 2018, our reserves have continued to grow, increasing our reserve to debt ratio to 2.2 to 1, up from 0.4 to 1 in 2010. In 2018, our reserves increased by $17 million, while our operating expenses increased by $1 million. This caused our total reserves as a percentage of expenses to increase by 5% over 2017 levels. This financial indicator shows us how much money is set aside for our future needs. The increase in reserves can be used to assist council with meeting strategic objectives and provide the ability to fund major capital projects while incurring little to no additional debt. Some items to note on the statement of operation are a $1.5 million increase in investment income. This is the result of an increase in our reserve, cash, and our investment balances, along with 3 interest rate increases that took place in 2018. Factors contributing to the $6 million user fee increase include the Public Utilities Commission user charges, non-municipal contributions to capital projects, and an increase in our user fees to offset Bill 148 expenses. The $6 million decrease in income from government business entities was due to Integris's investment in North Kent Wind that took place in 2017. The decrease in other revenues of $4 million is due to a one-time grant we received from North Kent Wind in 2017, which we didn't receive in 2018. Also in 2018, our child care program took over operation from our Leon program. This change represents a significant portion of the $4 million increase in expenses for social and family services. This increase in expenses has been offset by additional revenues for that same child care program. As per Public Sector Accounting Board standards, Chatham-Kent needs to present our financial statements on an accrual basis. This slide displays the reconciliation from an accrual surplus to a cash surplus. As an example, in accrual basis accounting, amortization for capital assets is recorded as an expense, where under the cash basis, amortization is not a cash outlay. The cash outlay is the time that the asset is actually purchased. Chatham-Kent's annual budget is prepared on a cash basis, as we are concerned with the amount of funds that we receive and how we intend to spend those funds throughout the year. Our financial statements, conversely, are prepared on an accrual basis to ensure that we are in compliance with the aforementioned standards. The municipality's 2018 cash surplus of $4.7 million is primarily attributable to significant assessment growth related to both the Panhandle Pipeline and North Kent Wind. Another contributing factor is Chatham-Kent's significant increase in interest income. If you were to take these 2 significant factors out, the overall 2018 cash surplus would have been approximately $500,000. This cash surplus further strengthens Council's ability to meet their future strategic objectives and contribute to any future major capital projects with acquiring little to no additional debt. Net financial assets, or net debt, is a measurement of our future revenues required to pay for the past transactions or past events. A net debt position means we'd require future revenues to pay for past expenses. Our $135 million net asset position indicates that our assets exceed our liabilities, and hence our past transactions are not negatively impacting our future revenue requirements. This has increased by $36 million over 2017 levels. This graph highlights the trend in Chatham-Kent's net financial position. Chatham-Kent was in a net financial debt position prior to 2014. As you can see, it has improved to a strong net financial asset position, an increase of $204 million since 2010.
Any questions? Seeing none, we get a Councillor Kirkwood-White. Sorry, can you? Yes.
Sorry, long fingernails. I would move the recommendation to adopt the audited financial statements for the period ended December 31st, 2018.
Councillor Finn?
I'll second it.
Any questions? Let's put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0.
Item 16B, 2018 final operations variance.
Councillor Bondi?
I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor Crew?
I'll second that.
Any questions? Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. Under the Reserve for Strategic Development, I wonder if you can give us some examples of the kinds of things that we've approved in the past under that particular category?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. A good example would be the RM40 festival, where it was around 80 to 85,000, somewhere in that range that we spent from that. It's basically things that come up within the year that council has a priority on that they'd like to fund.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 17, Chief Administrative Office.
Item 17A, Chatham-Kent Council 2018 to 2022, term of priorities.
Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you. I move that council approve the CK Council 2018 to 2022 term of priorities as the following: growth, to grow our population to support the economy and labor force needs; community wellness, everyone is able to thrive and be safe; community engagement, the voice of the community is reflected in municipal decision-making; and environment, acting today for a healthy environment tomorrow.
Councillor B. McGregor.
I'll second.
Any questions? Councillor Harrigan.
So really more just a comment that I wanted to applaud both the council members around the table tonight for their effort and their commitment to getting us to setting up these priorities, and also to staff. I know that there were a number of staff hours that went into preparing, choosing who was going to coordinate the initiatives. And I wanted to also comment that I'm very pleased as chair of the CK 2035 committee to see alignment with our short-term priorities with CK's long-term community strategic plan. I think it's really important that as a council, we're looking at what our short-term priorities are to get to those long-term goals, and that very much shown through in the priorities that we've set for ourselves this term.
Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted, for those listening and watching, although they are listed alphabetically, A, B, C, D, they're not listed in order of priority. They are all equal priorities, not 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 17B, motion by Councillor Thompson regarding climate emergency.
Councillor Thompson.
That's different than what's in here. Which one does everybody want me to read? The short one? I'm going to read the long one. Whereas the municipality of Chatham-Kent has already acknowledged the ongoing negative impacts of climate change throughout the municipality, whereas the federal motion in the House of Commons on June 17th, 2019 passed 186 to 63 to declare a national climate emergency describes climate change as a real and urgent crisis driven by human activity, whereas the impacts of climate change will be catastrophic to Chatham-Kent's local economy and municipal budget, and will result in significant adversity for the constituents of Chatham-Kent. Whereas the municipality of Chatham-Kent can join a movement of municipal governments who agree that significant change must occur at the local level in order to affect local and global change in line with globally acceptable targets. Whereas the municipality of Chatham-Kent can position itself as a leader in municipal policy, setting the example of how to reduce the municipality's own environmental impact through areas such as procurement, life cycle asset management, community services, and urban planning to meet global targets referred to in the Paris Agreement. Whereas positioning the municipality of Chatham-Kent as an environmentally responsible and sustainable partner can attract further investment in our community from partners and stakeholders. Whereas an emergency is defined as an often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. Whereas the United Nations has identified there is only 11 years left to prevent
irreversible damage from climate change. Therefore, be it the resolved that the municipality of Chatham-Kent officially declare a climate emergency for the purposes of joining a national and international movement and to provide a lens through which all strategy, policies, action items, and opportunities can be viewed, and that staff work swiftly to identify target areas in municipal policy through which specific changes can have the greatest impact to reduce our individual and collective environmental impact, and that staff work swiftly to identify means to engage all constituents, partners, and stakeholders as active participants in preventing further climate change while reducing damages that have already occurred.
Councilor Latimer?
I'll second that.
Okay.
All right, I had a whole lot of comments drawn up, but I think I'll be hemorrhaging votes the longer I talk tonight, so I will keep it as short and sweet as I can. I do have some, though, and I do have some questions. I'm a little bit all over the map here. I've done the best I can to organize my thoughts. A lot of people have asked me, what exactly is a climate emergency, and why do we need to declare one? I think that's one of the questions we'll be answering here tonight. I can only really speak from my own viewpoint. Declaring a climate emergency doesn't require any specific actions. That is true. Individual municipalities can do whatever steps they choose. Of course, that does mean that a declaration can mean whatever a community wants it to mean, or it can mean absolutely nothing at all. Like a good strategic direction, it can be used as a lens to affect everything we do in all of the different sectors we have. Like a bad mission statement, it can be thrown out the window in each and every decision we make. That is something that we will have to decide to do at council. That is something that the community will have to hold us to account for. For me, I want to thank Mr. Zuzik, who was here. It was his presentation in ERIO that this came into focus for me. Prior to that night, I probably would have scoffed at the notion of a declaration. But it is said that people have a different mode of functioning when they move into emergency mode. And it's true, it is a way to focus the mind. And when I saw that presentation, there was a focusing of minds in that room in ERIO, as I'm sure there was here tonight when we saw that. It was no longer about save my house. I heard that a lot prior to the meetings in ERIO. It became save our community, save our tax base, save our tax dollars, save my business, save our tourism, address our infrastructure issues. That's when it became real to me, and that's where I started from, truth be told. That's the lens I was using. I was using strictly an infrastructure lens, a good old-fashioned conservative worried about the dollars and the cents in the budget. How do we build better? How do we plan better? How do we become more resilient in our communities? I know, honestly, that water levels go up and down. I had a couple of emails alluding to that maybe I didn't understand that, and I do. And I think if you saw that tonight, you understand that too. And the issue is when they drop really low and when they come up really high. And then other people started reaching out to me. Tourism operators started reaching out to me, worried about phosphorus in the Great Lakes, and the fishing industry is concerned, and the tourism industry is concerned as well. And these people want to partner with us, and they want to partner with each other. And grassroots organizations like Zero Waste CK want to get involved. And I want to say thank you very much to Mrs. Easter, who was here for her comments this evening, as well as Mr. Swanek and Ms. Recker, I hope I got that right, who spoke this evening too. Because they spoke on a telescope for Ms. Easter, and Zero Waste CK also spoke about what they want to do in creating their partnerships. It affects agriculture as well. In CK, we grow more vegetables than any other region in Ontario, and we employ a lot of people in those sectors. This year, and I don't want to confuse climate for weather, but we went from a swamp, the wettest spring we'd ever seen on record, and we're well into on our road to drought at this point. We haven't had much rain in the month of July. I'm not sure if you've noticed. That climate affects our food availability, how we grow it, how we process it. The other issue I did want to bring up, and I believe Mr. Kelly can speak to it for a moment. I do have some questions, but I would like to see his presentation on the Talbot Trail. The matter of fact is we're going to lose the Talbot Trail between Dealtown and Wheatley, some 35K in the next 50 to 100 years, maybe less, and that's going to go. So I think I do have some more comments, but at this point I would really like to see what Mr. Kelly had presented or was going to present for us.
So thank you, Mayor Caniff. Oh,
Is that where we want to do it?
Just to pipe in, I've got a number of local specific resident
Okay.
questions around the Talbot Trail closing that might distract us from the larger conversation about the
That's
climate
fair.
emergency.
If staff's okay with that, I'm okay with that. All right, I wasn't aware, that's wonderful.
no, thank
Excellent,
you.
okay, that's fine. Then we will get to that not momentarily, given tonight's agenda. CK Public Health, I know, is working on developing a food strategy with participation from all the areas of the food system to develop recommendations that will prioritize health, our economy, our culture, and the environment. So it is true that we've had a number of initiatives and work done in this vein already. I know Mr. Kelly has worked in this vein as well. And I think if I could direct Mr. Shropshire, I believe he could speak to some of the things we already have been doing that have already kind of been baked into our broader strategic plan at this point.
Thank you, Your Worship. So council took some as Councillor Harrigan's pointed out a few minutes ago, council's taken some very real steps to align our strategic priorities with some short-term gains. So some of the major strides we've taken over the course of the last couple of years, this council has supported the growth of the largest private sector green energy investments, certainly in Ontario, if not Canada, with our wind turbines and our solar power. We don't often get credit for that, but in terms of reducing carbon footprint and in terms of adding green energy, that's been major. We've also had a leadership in John's area from Mr. McAllister, looking at reducing our carbon footprint with a community energy plan. We've also done a number of initiatives that are spelled out in our strategic plan that we talked about on the 17th of June. So I think we've taken some real steps to try and address some of these issues. And I would encourage council as we're going forward, if you support this amendment, is to task staff over the course of the coming few months with our budget to actually put some more meat on the bones to say, what exactly do you want to do? How much is it going to cost? Where are we going to make the investments and what's the return on the investment? I think this has got to be a pretty balanced scorecard if we're going to be moving ahead for the long term. But this is raising the focus of how this has to be balanced in relationship to all the other investments we have to make. So I think council's done some really good things. The level of interest in the community, we've got a number of people here wearing green shirts tonight and showing their support for the initiative. Earlier today, I spoke with the new Director of Education for the Chatham-Kent District School Board and talking about how we could actually involve the students, because it's critically important to our youth in our community to protect our environment. So I'm happy to answer specific questions, but those are just a few of the major items that we put forward. And I think based on Mr. Zuzek's presentation this evening, we can see that we've got a lot of other things facing us right now. We have to plan for that and make the best investment possible for our community.
Okay, I'm sure there's going to be other questions and comments regarded to Mr. Shropshire. I'm just about at the end because, like I said, I don't have a lot of questions. It is pretty clear in my mind. Again, people still have asked me, do we really need to do this declaration? And the answer is it's largely political, but there are people in the audience and there are people in the communities that want us to take that political leadership to lend our support and our voice to this issue. And I've come to learn that there are two different aspects to policy. I've learned that very well over the last 5 years. There's the letter and there is the spirit. And truth be told, I'm the spirit kind of guy. I like obeying the spirit of the law, the spirit of the policy more than anything else. But I also understand that if it's not written down, sometimes it's not worth the paper it's not written on. So sometimes we need to take these steps to take that political leadership to move these issues forward. There were some concerns about the term emergency versus crisis. More than 300 Quebec municipalities have endorsed the declaration. Major cities like Montreal, Quebec City, and Sherbrooke all use the word emergency. I'm comfortable with the word emergency. You could pull out a thesaurus that says crisis and emergency are synonyms, but I'm not a lawyer, and I know the meaning of words is something they like to argue about. Vancouver was the first city outside of Quebec to declare a climate emergency in January of 2019. Since then, 40-plus cities have used the word emergency. As far as I can tell, only Guelph has used the word crisis. So what does it mean? It means declaring a climate emergency means addressing emissions. It means addressing phosphorus, erosion, waste, lake level issues, budgets, infrastructure, quality of life, the economy, prosperity. What it doesn't mean, and I don't want to see happen, and it's something I could never support, is damaging a family's business, irrevocably altering the way of somebody's life, hindering our economic growth. That's not what a climate emergency is about, not by any stretch. More than anything, it's about trying to protect those things. We're not going to solve global climate change here in little old Chatham-Kent. We're just not. That's for the provincial and the federal governments of the world to decide upon. I don't think it's realistic to think we are. I think it is realistic to admit that we're on our own, though, and we do have to solve the issues that we are facing. In our PUC, today we heard about issues in Erie and Wallaceburg brought on by high lake levels, and our public infrastructure is at risk. So my motion was relatively open-ended. I'm going to leave it that way for now, and I look forward to the debate and the questions that everybody has. Thank you.
Councillor Harrigan?
Thank you. I want to first start by saying that I really appreciate Councillor Thompson's motion and all of the support that that I have received via emails and the deputations tonight. I do have what I think is a friendly amendment that helps to give staff a bit more concrete direction in terms of what it means to declare a climate emergency in Chatham-Kent. So if the mover and seconder are okay, following the second word staff in the motion, added that staff be challenged to work internally as well as engage stakeholders and community members to prepare information and recommendations for concrete and cost-effective initiatives to address the climate change emergency in CK ahead of the budget 2020 deliberations. And the purpose of this is, again, to take the higher level policy and leadership and to translate that additionally into providing direction for our staff to come up with action. So in following with some of the lessons that we learned when setting our own priorities, it's really council's role to set that agenda, and then from there, staff can look at the development and implementation of what that agenda actually means to come back to council for approval. So I think this kind of allows us to be in line with that policy creation.
Councillor Thompson, you okay?
Very friendly, absolutely.
Councillor Latimer? All right, make the change there.
So I will say just briefly that I recognize that for some around this table, this is a very new area, and there could be potentially lots to learn around some of the climate change issues, and sometimes the issues could be so big and so large that it could be discouraging to say, what can we as a municipality do? But the truth is declaring climate states of emergency locally is actually something that's happening globally, with the recognition that municipal governments and city initiatives, local initiatives, become that first line of defense, the first opportunity for boots on ground, and the best way for people to build networks of resilience when it comes to things like climate change. And I think that there are good opportunities for us, knowing now that we've set the environment as one of our 4 priorities for the next 4 years, and also are planning to potentially consider this. There's good opportunity for education for councillors to take place in the coming months or years around what things have historically been done and what we can continue to do. So I think that could be potentially worked into some of our council meetings. But more importantly, I think that whatever your views are aside around climate change, this is a decision we're not making for today. If my kids stayed up till 9 o'clock, they'd be here advocating for what we have to invest in, and that's recognizing that the impact of climate change is something we're not just feeling today. It's not just about the wet spring and then the dry summer. It's about the long-term sustainability of this community. And if we want to see Chatham-Kent grow, we need to see it grow in a positive environment, and that includes, that's climate. I think passing this motion allows council to advocate for urgent action to happen. I want to thank Councillor Thompson and Councillor Latimer for accepting the amendment, because I think it provides that level of concreteness for us to say, yes, this is an issue. Now let's talk about what we can do about it, and gives it that timeline that it needs for us to see what action can be done without necessarily incurring ridiculous additional costs to the tax base, potentially with cost savings to our tax base. And I just wanted to point out that in Mr. Zuzak's presentation earlier, there was a comment made that we are all impacted by climate change, and I think nothing could be truer. So I support this wholeheartedly, and I hope that my colleagues around the table do as well.
Councillor Latimer?
to save time. I totally agree with Councillor Harrigan, and I'll let the next person speak. I will support Councillor Thompson, and the amendment actually makes me feel better about my support of that. Councillor Thompson's motion. Thank you.
Councillor Pincinel, followed by Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I support the initiative too. I think by doing this, we position ourselves as well to be on board to receive any federal or provincial money if it does become available. This will also keep us in the loop with what other communities within the province are doing, because they're all facing the same problems, at least at this end. I'm still hoping the water's going to go down next year, but even at that, that's only part of the climate change issues. And I think we need to start somewhere, and this is probably as good a spot as any.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I agree with a lot of the comments made so far tonight, and I think it's important to note that whether we declare it or not, a lot of people already live the climate emergency, and disproportionately that affects people that are already at risk and are vulnerable. As a municipality, just the effects it has on municipal infrastructure and our ability to provide services, that should be enough to say that we need to take action. But thinking about that human toll and the priority that children in our community have placed on environment as something that they hold dear to their heart. When we had the duct tape wall up behind the mayor and had students through here, it was amazing how consistent that messaging was. So that's something that's really important to them and something that we should reflect. I think it's appropriate we discuss this tonight, and we've heard a lot of environmental issues come up, and certainly I know a lot of people have seen it in their inbox this week and talked about it in Brian Fluker's coffee shop. And some of the things we'll hear is that maybe the problem's too big and the community doesn't have the resources, or Toronto won't listen, or even that it's just symbolic and it doesn't really matter. But I think someone said it isn't how big a part of the problem you are, it's how big a part of the solution you can be. So I think that that's what we're doing tonight. We're saying, yeah, the problem's big, and big problems take aggregate solutions. Even if the motion was just symbolic, that's probably enough. And it's adding our voice to communities here and internationally that are saying we need to advocate for solutions. And I think the fact that the motion goes farther now and says we're going to take some concrete steps, this is one of our priorities this term of council, and that we're going to have action that's consistent with this common goal is really important. We've seen members of our community already acting. We've seen private industry already acting, and it's, I think, incumbent on us to act as well.
Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I want to thank all the speakers and the presenters and everyone for adding a lot of clarity to this. Thank you, Councillor Harrigan. I was prepared to send this back to get more information because I wasn't quite sure what we were voting on, but now I am. Whether you believe in climate change or not, we're not fools to see what's happening. Every one of us that sit on a committee, whether it's an infrastructure committee or a community committee out around the shorelines, it's really affecting our community. And I think that we have to take some steps. What I would like to add is I would like to see a benchmark. Where are we? Like, what are we, like, how do we know when we're better? What are we doing? We already know about the turbines and solar and all of those things, but how do we get better with our waste diversion? How do we get better for not just our children, but our children's children and ourselves? When we've seen all the rain where the crops were damaged, and that affects all of us, whether it's in the supermarket or the farmers selling their product. I want to thank Mr., I'm going to say his name wrong, Thank you, Zuzak, for his presentation. That was really very clear as to where we've been and where we're probably going to go. So I will support this. I would just like to ensure that there's some lines as to where we are and where we would like to go in the future. So what we've been done well. I'd like to see Chatham-Kent as a champion. It's not just Chatham-Kent, it's our province, and it's our planet. So, we have to take care of it. We haven't done so good so far, but I think we can all do better.
Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I agree with what's being said. I know that we have done a great deal in climate change initiatives, and we probably have to do more. But my fear is I'm on the Conservation Authority, and we're doing the same thing, but we're getting government cuts, terrible cuts, because of the red tape or eliminating red tape, the cutbacks in tree planting significantly. So I think we need to get our provincial counterparts on board here and say, we're doing our part, but we definitely need you to do your part. With the budget coming down, it looks like they're degressing where we're progressing. So I think that we need to send a message to the province indicating what we're doing here and expect them to follow suit.
Councilor McGrail?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I too agree that climate change and the environment is a very big, hot subject that is not going to go away anytime soon. And I want to make that clear. I'm hesitant on this because we're already going through, you know, our lessons with the community festival and all the fundings, and it being so broad that we're not qualifying. And as we go forward, and there's going to be a lot of hot issues and a lot of subjects that are going to be brought up under the climate change broad statement that I'm not sure should be under there, number one. And number two, I don't want to fall back on this and say, well, this is why, or change it. So there's a lot of individual issues and subjects within that climate change that need to be dealt with on an individual basis. And having a broad statement kind of gives an umbrella coverage that I don't know if I'm comfortable accepting as under that whole climate change umbrella. Plus, in that, and we've seen that, is that I know this is a statement, and this is a political statement, but there's always some legalities involved in all statements that we make. So we need to remember that that kind of situations also.
See no other question. Oh, Councillor Solomon, and okay. Councillor Solomon.
Okay. I have a question to our administration. We have recently, a couple minutes ago, set priorities with the environment as one of them, but we have an environmental action plan already in place, correct? Yes? Someone going to answer that? Oh, maybe the CEO. We have an action plan already in place, through your worship?
We have a few plans in place. One is a plan to reduce our carbon emissions across Chatham-Kent, or our energy consumption. There is no one broad plan in terms of like a climate change action plan that we would have that would be broken into a number of smaller components. And I think that sort of aligns with Councilor McGrail's comments a few moments ago.
Haven't we hired 3 people who's in the last less than a year whose sole duty is environmental matters?
I'm going to look to my colleagues to help support me here. We've hired an environmental planner, Gabrielle, who's with us this evening, and we're in the process of hiring I believe, a recruitment for an environmental technologist.
When I say hired, I mean we've made the places for them.
I believe there were the two
here
positions. You have two more positions.
So there's 3. So we have. So my point is that it's not that we've been sitting on our hands. I don't think the public who's listening to this should think that we've been sitting on our hands. We have an environmental action plan. We've set the environment as a priority. We've increased staff, much to my dismay sometimes, but they've been in the area of environment. So we've been doing that. And I did listen to the last deputation, and I agreed with everything that he said. I don't know why we wouldn't be doing that anyway without taking on words that bring emotion with them, which is an emergency. I know it's going to pass, and that's fine. My worry is the devil's in the details. So, because I was concerned about it, I did some reading. Diane Sachs, one of the leading environmental lawyers in Ontario, who also writes in Municipal World, so you should be seeing that every month described environmental emergency and what you would do to combat it. And she said you should have car-free zones, which is great in Vancouver or Toronto or maybe Montreal, not so practical in Chatham-Kent. She also advocated that people stop eating beef and pork, because after all, beef is one of the greatest sources of methane in the world, and pork, we all know from the debates of, 10 years ago or more, where we put in place all sorts of environmental constraints on the waste that pigs produce. We also know that corn is king in Chatham-Kent, as it always was said, and most of that corn is not just seed corn, it goes to feed the cattle and the livestock. So those are some of the concerns I have. The others are, of course, I would hate to see new regulations put in place, just like Councillor Thompson said, that affects people with the basic necessities of life, like their waste systems in their houses, or requires them, if they're going to rebuild, to meet Florida standards because they're on water. It's the devil in the detail that gives me a concern, and I know this is all very well-meaning, and so I know it's going to pass, but I just caution that when it gets down to that other level, I don't want to see taxes increase as a result of it. I don't want, the other thing, maybe you should do, Mr. Turner's department should do, I hope you all know that people who live on waterfront pay higher taxes on their houses than people who don't live on waterfront. There's a premium to live on waterfront. Apparently, from Mr. Zuzak's report, Mr. Turner should be bringing us a report back as a result of this motion to reduce the taxes that people pay on waterfront, because after all, it's not good to be there. In fact, it's very bad to be there, apparently, from the report tonight. That's my concerns, and I think it's important to express these concerns to show that there are two sides to this, the emergency, not two sides to climate change, but two sides to whether we call it an emergency. Our federal government throws around phrases pretty loosely sometimes, and it just gives me pain to think that we're following their approach to things. I mean, they can, I won't use one of the expressions, well, certainly we know that they call a genocide different than it would ever been used before, but I just hesitate to start jumping on bandwagons. And I think it's important that we have these kind of discussions and record that it's not all just smiles and rainbows, but there are devils in these details, and I look to administration to at least make sure that we flush those things out and don't make things worse for families as a result of a motion passed like this. Because it will pass. No one in a green shirt has to worry about that.
Councillor C. McGregor?
I think I'm going to pass. Thanks.
Councillor Kirkwood-White?
I was all settled in until I heard our last councillor speak, and now I'm all confused again. So I had difficulty with this motion coming in, and then there were some changes. I thought it was too loose on what we were directing administration to do. So that was remedied, and that solved that one. And listening to everybody speak tonight around the table helped me make those decisions. But some of the concerns that I've had with this are exactly what Councillor Solomon has just expressed. So it's not that we don't believe there's issues going on with climate change. I fully believe that. I fully believe that we need administration to bring us back at information that can outline exactly what we're doing and help us with direction before budget going forward on how we make future changes and how we become better global citizens within our own community, and how we help our citizens that are struggling with different issues and the way we work further. But I also know that from what I heard tonight, there's going to be issues moving forward about building permits being issued and different things that if we're going to go down this road, we're going to have to tackle those issues also. And I would have really liked to, like, I feel like, again, it's one of those, we're putting the cart before the horse. I would have preferred to have this information from administration in a bit of a direction. I do feel it's strictly a political statement that we're making, and but you know, I guess I'll see where I end up at the end of the conversations.
Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to thank Councillor Wright for sharing a document this afternoon. The City of Thunder Bay declared a state of emergency in 2012, and they have created a climate adaptation strategy that I think we could probably have a look at as a template for some of the work that administration might be able to do over the next little while. I had a number of highlights from that report that I was going to share, but given the time, I think I'll forego that.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we'll go to we'll go to Councillor Latimer, and then if Councillor Thompson wants to say anything final, and we'll put it to vote.
Thank you, through the mayor. I too struggled with this. I wrote an email a couple of days ago. You all read it, but I was hoping we don't need to spend any more time debating what to call it, whether we call it crisis, emergency, climate adaptation. As long as it ends up, we're going forward with a plan, a strategic plan that I think the second part of this motion takes care of. And that whether we do or we don't, whether we call it emergency, crisis, doesn't mean we're not going to have to deal with the permits and the people with it. All those things we're worried about are going to happen anyway. It's irrelevant to what we call this. So I do agree because of taking a look at how the other municipalities and Canada has followed this approach. I'm willing to give it a go, but as I said, I'm most concerned with the fact that we take this and we go forward with a strategic plan and setting up sustainable measures that mitigate immediate concerns and detail out short and long-term policy and planning and zoning changes that are green and sustainable. And we will do that with that plan. And we can decide then what our liabilities and our measures and our effectiveness and objectives measures are going to be.
Councillor Thompson, any closing?
I don't have any closing comments. I think everybody, except for maybe Councillor McGregor's made up their mind. So we'll see how the dice go.
Okay, we'll put it to vote then.
Councillor McGregor. All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 18, Infrastructure and Engineering Services.
I thought we'd wait for the standing ovation, Your Worship. This sounds perfect. Item 18A, Capital Lorraine Levying Bylaw, 2019 Final Tax Levy.
Councillor Kirkwood-White.
I'll move the recommendation.
Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Canfield. I'll second it.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 18B, Drain Management Levying Bylaw, 2019 Final Tax Levy.
Councillor Harrigan.
I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor B. McGregor.
I'll second.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
Councillor Pinsino. Councillor Pinsino. Thank you. All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 18C, 2019 Trails and Active Transportation Life Cycle Projects.
Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I would like to move the recommendations that the list of the 2019 Trails Life Cycle projects valued at an estimated cost of $660,340 be approved, and the list of the 2019 active transportation projects valued at an estimated cost of $341,130 be approved.
Councillor Foss,
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll second it.
any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in, motion passes 16-1.
Item 18D, encroachments, greenhouse services, 2961 Talbot Trail, Wheatley.
Councillor Harrigan,
I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor B. McGregor,
I'll second.
any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
Councillor Bondi? Thank you. All votes are in, motion passes 17-0.
Item 18E, CK Transit Route Enhancements. And administration would just like to draw to your attention, there was an update on recommendation number 3, and that's currently on the screen.
Councillor Kirkwood-White?
Thank you, Your Worship. Given the fact that I am the past chair of the Transit Task Force, if you'll bear with me, I'd like to read the whole darn thing. It is recommended that council approve the addition of a 5th bus route entitled the Around the River bus route for the Chatham Conventional Transit Service. This route will be extended to the end of the current contract, June 30th, 2021, with in-touch connections for a total cost of $380,786.43. The additional route will address overcapacity issues on Route 1 of up to 24% during peak times, accommodate forecasted ridership demand for the new casino, provide a transit route on Richmond Street from Kyle Drive to Queen Street. Also, that council approve the addition of a midday run for routes A, C, and D for the interurban service provided by CityLinks to the end of the current contract with the same date for a total cost of $77,989.70. The additional route will address a service gap that has been identified by the CK Transit Task Force through public consultation as reported to council at the June 24th meeting. And the last part of the recommendation, that council provide administration with the authority to adjust bus routes and the timing of routes in Chatham-Kent to assist with the timely implementation of improving customer service, and that minor route adjustments will be managed within the operations budget.
Councillor Thompson,
I'd be happy to second that.
any questions? Councillor Crew?
Thank you. Anne-Marie, I was just wondering, I'm approached quite often about the handy bus access. Has that been considered for enhancement in Chatham and Wallaceburg?
Thank you, Your Worship. The handy service is not part of this reporting. We do have a CK strategic project that council approved that's going on for a year, and we're looking at the entire service as a whole, all services.
Councillor Thompson?
Thank you very much. I'll be curious and to get an answer on number 3 there, because I do have a concern, and I did reach out to Councillor Kirkwood-White, but I would like to tell a story. My grandmother is 93 years old, and she doesn't drive as much as she used to. Doesn't drive at all, relies on public transit actually the whole time. She doesn't live in Cedar Springs, but if she did, and she wanted to get to Blenheim, she'd get on the bus in Cedar Springs, but she wouldn't go to Blenheim. She would go down Talbot Trail. She'd go check out North Buxton, South Buxton, Merlin, Tilbury. Then she'd finally get to Chatham. Then she'd hop a bus in Chatham, drive to Charing Cross, finally into Blenheim. That's a trip of 95 kilometers in our interurban busing. Or she could hitchhike 6 kilometers and go into Blenheim. So my concern is is why do we have somebody's grandmother, not mine, because she doesn't live there, but there are grandmothers that do, from Cedar Springs driving all the way to Tilbury into Chatham to get to Blenheim. And then when she wants to get back from the senior center, back to Chatham, back to Tilbury, through Merlin, through Buxton, finally back in Cedar Springs. So the question is does number 3 provide enough leeway for administration to address that?
Your Worship, again, the strategic plan is going to cover that. I'm only dealing with the actual identified statistical information that was provided during the CK Transit Review. We do have the one-year program going on right now that we are going to be looking at all of the routes. We're looking at the conventional service changing completely and possibly having on-demand. We're looking with the community groups, economic development, and with our social OW group to look at all services to find out where are we having dead zones and if we can come to council with a reasonable budget to be able to correct those inadequacies.
I can appreciate that's the scope. So when do we have, and I'll just stick with my issue, when do we have any idea when we could possibly address that concern of mine and my rhetorical grandmother, like the widow on Willomac?
Thank you. I know Mr. Clark, I spoke with you 1 year. Yeah, Ian Clark, I know, was the gentleman that's been assigned to that task. I spoke to him this morning. The type of concern that you just expressed, Councillor Thompson, is the type of concern they're working at with the on-demand system. And we're looking at a variety of different options, but basically our current transit system is, the concerns you've expressed, I think, I don't think I'll repeat it, but they're recognized, and that's what we're trying to get to with an on-demand system. It'd be cheaper for us to subsidize an Uber ride or a U ride than it would be to continue to have buses travel all over Chatham-Kent largely empty. So that's been recognized, that's what we're trying to address. And thankfully, for the first time, there's some new technology available to us now. Certainly wasn't available, when we had our last contract that would allow that type of flexibility. So that was built into the terms of the study that's going on right now.
Okay, I guess respectfully, and I'm going to cross a little bit of a barrier here. We talk about high tech. I've got a pretty low tech solution. It would be the bus that comes down Charing Cross Road doesn't hang a left on Middle. Instead, it comes down to Cedar Springs and hangs the left. That's a low-tech solution that potentially we could look at when we're dealing with these issues. And maybe there's issues surrounding that. I'm just concerned that if somebody in Cedar Springs wanted to get to Blenheim, it's a 95-kilometer ride or a 6-kilometer hitchhike. Thank you.
Can I just address that quickly? We do have a bus that goes into Blenheim. We have an alternate route. So we do go the same direction. One goes to Blenheim, one goes to Tilbury.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I'll let Councillor Kirkwood-White close.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just a couple of additional comments. There were a number of recommendations made during the 5 months that our task force met, including deputations and other recommendations that came from regular riders. There were a couple of things, very prominent requests for extended service, a Sunday service, those kinds of things. All of those recommendations that are not dealt with in this report have been passed along to Ian Clark, who is taking the lead on the strategy project. So they will be covered off in the next phase of the transportation project. So, including Councillor Thompson's concern.
Okay, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0.
Item 18F, school zone speed limits and community safety zones, phase 2.
Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor Finn.
Happy to second.
Any questions? Councillor Latimer?
This is just a question, since we've been dealing with changing as speed zones. The communities involved here have all been, they're all aware of this, Mark, and are there any concerns that we should be aware of?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. To date, I have received, and our group has received a few questions and possibly concerns. One of them had to do with our new 40 kilometer per hour zones are considered static. That means that they're in effect all times or any time. And there was a comment made that other communities are implementing variable times, like during school days and things like that. But the Highway Traffic Act is pretty clear that those types of speed limits have to be, they require electronic devices that notify the motorists of when the speed limit is in effect, not just a sign saying the date and times. So those usually have to deal with electrically illuminated signs that turn off and on when as programmed, or speed limit signs with flashing yellow beacons. And other than that, a couple of concerns about installation of signs in front of people's houses and that type of thing. But that's, I think that's the extent of the concerns so far.
Councillor Hall?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just a quick question for you, Mark. This is phase 2 that we're looking at for the safety zones, but from what I understand, not all of phase 1 is completed. I know that's the case in some parts in Wallaceburg. Is there any other parts of the community that are still in phase 1?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. That's correct. Not all of the sign installations for phase 1 have been completed yet, and we are working with our public works staff to try and get all those phase 1 signs, as well as get going on phase 2 signs for start of the school year. As far as other communities, we are aware of a couple of locations in Chatham, Thamesville, and of course Wallaceburg, which I relayed that information to you earlier today.
So you said it's phase 1 should be all completely done before the school year?
That's our goal, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor C. McGregor?
Thank you, and through the mayor. I was just a little confused when I was reading the recommendations listed, because it's titled subject phase 2, and the recommendations list the communities. Then Wallaceburg's listed down here in phase 2 as on Albert Street between Reome and Wills, which has been there for a while. And then again in the second recommendation, we get down to the bottom in Wallaceburg, and again we've listed here as again Albert Street on there. So was that the only school in phase 1 and phase 2? Because when I read down further in the report, it lists phase 1 and lists 4 schools in Wallaceburg. So I was just a little confused as to, is this report recommending we move into phase 2, or is it actually finishing up phase 1? I'm sorry, I was just confused. I read it a couple times, just trying to determine where the schools in the community fall, and I'm sure, and I don't know, maybe other counselors in their communities had the same issue, but maybe you could just help me out with the answer.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. So all of the areas listed in the recommendations are part of phase 2, which we're asking for council approval for tonight. And so anything in the recommendations is phase 2. There's one location noted, which is a correction. It was so in one of the locations in Richtown was accidentally omitted from the recommendations of phase 1. So that was included in phase 2, and it's noted in the comments as something that we're trying to correct. But in the background section of the report, we listed all of the Phase 1 locations, and that's just to, some members, council may be, this is the first time seeing this, so we included this information in this report. But the recommendations are all Phase 2, except for the one location that is a correction.
Okay, so after, if we pass Phase 2 now, I'm guessing it's because we've already passed Phase 1, even though Phase 1's not done?
Yes, that's correct. We're still in the process of implementing Phase 1.
Okay.
But we completed the investigations for Phase 2, and as soon as we can get the bylaws or the recommendations approved and the bylaws passed, then we will proceed with Phase 2.
Okay, well, these are Phase 2. When do you anticipate Phase 1 will be done? Was that what you'd mentioned, that Phase 1 will be finished probably before the school year? That's, okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Our goal is to get
Okay.
Phase 1 implemented.
And maybe you could just answer, and somebody just messaged me this the other day, and I'm not completely positive about this, but I was told that there were speed limit signs put up on Christ the King, like lit signs by Christ the King School in Wallaceburg, and that and I meant to drive around there, and I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance today before I came, and that they were also told that by somebody there that they were supposed to be over on Albert Street, but are there lit speed signs on, or like flashing signs on in front of Christ the King? Which didn't quite make sense to me, that there'd be flashing signs over there that were installed right after school was out for the summer, so. And I apologize, I wish I had driven by there, but since you're standing there, I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Caniff. Christ the King, that is on Thomas?
Yes.
Okay.
By the hospital.
I'm not aware, as of right now, we have not recommended the installation of any illuminated signs or signs with beacons. We'll have to investigate that.
Oh, I'll drive by tomorrow, sorry, I'll get in touch with you if there's signs there, thank you.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. In Ridgetown, we'll welcome any sign we get, for we have not one crosswalk in town. We have 2 major schools along the main street, especially on 21 Highway, coming out by the arena there, where Nahi Ridge is. It's very dangerous. There isn't even one sign out there right now. Thank you.
Okay, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in, motion passes 14-0.
Item 18G, motion by Councillor C. McGregor regarding parking amendments, Wallaceburg.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor, in light of time, I think it's kind of self-explanatory, so I won't read all of the recommendations there. I'm happy to answer questions. I will explain to you that a lot of these recommendations come from consultation and conversation with the Wallaceburg Adult Center and the Senior Center, where there were concerns for the amount of parking. We do have a fairly large lot, a 3-hour lot, down at the other end of town, which for, a lot of us, it's easy traveling, it's a few blocks, but for some of our seniors that have mobility issues, it's very difficult for them to get down there. And we've had a very, we've had a parking attendant who does his job to the letter, but it has created a lot of concern within the community. And so these are recommendations that basically came from those meetings. There are some areas that are not within the BIA, and I have spoken to Mr. T-Bear, and I think they said would be fairly easy to proceed on those because they're very similar to other communities. But there is an area of Connect Park, which is right beside parking lot O, that does have senior parking that might lend to further parking, but would of course need to go in communication with the BIA. There has been attempts to get meetings together that Mr. T-Bear will come to and discuss some of these options. But they've not been able to form quorum. So hopefully before August 12th, I think the plan is to even get some of the executive with Councillor Hall, Mr. T-Bear and myself together to come back and look at these recommendations. So again, these recommendations do not happen if this motion passes tonight. It will be based on the information provided from Mr. T-Bear and his fellows at the August 12th meeting.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Hall. Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
All votes are in. Motion passes 17-0.
Item 19, corporate services.
Item 19A, municipal significant events, clerk's delegation.
Councillor Crew,
I'll move the recommendations.
Councillor Finn.
I'll second.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
Councillor Wright? Thank you. All votes are in. Motion passes 16-0.
Item 20, there was no closed session, so we can skip that. Item 21, approval of communication items. Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to make note that in the information package for tonight's meeting, there was an interesting letter from the Ministry of Solicitor General indicating that we are compliant with the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. In light of the conversation tonight about emergencies, I thought people might like to know that. So essentially what that means is we're prepared for an emergency.
And would you be so bold to make put a motion to approve that as well?
I will be happy to do that. Thank you.
We have a seconder, Councillor Crew. Any other questions related to that? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item 22, non-agenda business. Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I have a question for Kathy Hoffman. So I understand we have around 2,000 active citizen requests, and that's when citizens call in with a concern. It's documented, given a number, and we have about 2,000 of those approximately. Is that correct?
Thank you, Worship. The 2,000 was just in the Public Works area.
Just in Public Works?
Yes.
So there's probably more?
There are, yes.
Okay. Given that we've spoke a lot about customer service, do you have a plan on how to deal with these issues?
Yes, Your Worship, I think we'll probably tag team the response to this. So there's a couple of things. Perhaps I'll have Thomas respond to the ones that are in his Public Works area specifically. But there's a couple of other pieces right now related to, we're rolling out some, soon rolling out some revisions to customer service standards. So those things will help some of the questions that people had around response time, tracking, getting information, upgrading some of the information on the status of complaints, how they can track them, et cetera. Doing some communications so that people understand how they can already get information that is available, et cetera. So those things will help some of the customer service sides of things.
Okay, so would it be fair to say, in the light of the hour, to ask you to bring back a report on how you're going to manage those things by September? I don't want to keep saying everything's coming in August, but if we could have it by our first meeting in September?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. We could probably combine that along with my colleagues to address some of the issues specifically in their areas too.
Because I don't think we can address a few thousand in this next few minutes.
All right, yep, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Latimer.
Acknowledge National Anti-Trafficking and Slavery Day. Be there, very important.
Councillor Kirkwood-White.
Thank you, Your Worship. Prior to the meeting, I left a couple of flyers on each person's desk, and the first is a flyer announcing the Chatham Cultural Centre Association's Experiences and Activities Silent Auction, which actually is being held in conjunction with the Art Crawl at the Thames Art Gallery on July 26th. If you've had a chance to follow the link online, you'll see that there are upwards of 23 different experiences and activities that are being auctioned off. And I would like to ask for your help in getting the message out. Corporately, if we can do that through our marketing and communications department, if we can get some help with that, as well as individually, there are always ways that you can help by liking and sharing on Facebook and maybe emailing and texting and messaging your friends and actually telling people in person too. So hope to see people out at Art Crawl on the 26th of July. The second flyer has to do with an event that the United Way is repeating at the Chatham Airport on September 14th. 6 years ago, we had a similar event. This one's just slightly different, and it's called the Rum Runners Gala. And it's an opportunity for you to mark September 14th in your calendar. Thank you.
Okay, so we got Councillor C. McGregor, and then Councillor McGrail, and then we'll go to Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you, and through the mayor, I won't go into too much on this, but please, if you're out and about, we have a great Jam Fest performance coming up on the civic holiday weekend, and we also have Wambo the following weekend after that. And I would just like to pass on to the mayor and my fellow councillor Aaron Hall that as we speak, a boat is being built for the two of you for the boat races at Wambo. So, and I will be there on the side cheering you on, taking pictures.
To sink? You want us to sink, don't you? Yeah.
Yes.
I was gonna say for you.
No, that's okay. I arranged for the boat. So thank you. If you want to come out and join us in Wallaceburg, there's a lot of great stuff going on.
Councillor McGrail.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I just want to invite everyone this Saturday, July 20th, to Mitchell's Bay's 8th Annual Antique Car Show. Coming out, it's from 11 to 4 p.m. We'd be glad to have you.
Okay, Councillor Harrigan.
Okay, great. I have two things. First is just a really quick plug. I'm not sure if members of council have heard, but this year's Hogs for Hospice event, which take place actually in the community of Leamington, has announced that Wheatley is intended to be one of the stops. So there will be hundreds and maybe thousands of motorcycles stopping in the community in one day. And so it will be a sight to see, certainly in CK. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to partner with some of our neighboring charities and community organizations that CK residents use. I know they're still working on some of the road closures and things like that, so I trust that's all going well. The second thing that I wanted to bring up was around the Talbot Trail road closure, and I'm just wondering if staff can provide a bit of an overview, and then I do have a series of questions around that.
So thank you again, Mayor Kempf, and thank you, Council, for this opportunity to speak on Talbot Trail. I do have a presentation prepared. I'll be very brief. I know it's the end of the night, but I would like to share this with you. So just to be clear with the closure location, this is Talbot Trail, former Highway 3. It's closed currently between Coatesworth Road and Port Road. The actual closure itself is technically between Coatesworth and Stevenson. Stevenson is a road that is still open. The reason, ultimately, we chose Port Road because Port Road is a more adequate road for the detoured traffic, and I'll get into that a little bit later, which we are kind of working towards improving. But the failure location is just immediately east of Coatesworth at the bend, the transition of the old alignment of Talbot Trail into the new alignment of Talbot Trail, as you can see on the attached map there. So basically a description of the failure. This is an image that was captured from our geotechnical services. We've engaged Golders Associates to come out ever since December of last year. They've been actively monitoring this on a monthly basis. As you can see, they have 17 different locations that they're monitoring. These are stakes and that are out in the field that they're measuring both vertical and horizontal displacement. They've identified unsafe conditions in danger to the public. The road support is unstable and experiencing severe erosion, which has been noted at up to 20 times faster than the historical regression rate. So going back on to what Peter said earlier in his presentation, the historical regression rates in that 50-year line, which I have that exact map in this little presentation as well, we're seeing it now up to 20 times faster based on the data that we have been studying ever since December of last year. So the evidence of severe tension cracking, which allows stormwater and the lake water to flow directly into the slope failure surface, it does accelerate the instability leading to active rotational and shear failures, which I'll touch upon soon. So basically, they commented this exactly in the report. The next significant storm event could be sufficient to cause major failure of the road at this current location. So a couple quick pictures here, and this is directly from on site and included in the report. It shows to the left something, this is right immediately south of the bend in the road of the active Talbot Trail location. We are experiencing very severe tension cracking from that rotational failure. I have a kind of a brief little example of what rotational failure means. Is where the bottom cuts out and then that sheer drop of the land just all of a sudden drops because it doesn't have that bottom to support it anymore. So we're currently seeing that along the entire shoreline at that location. The tension crack, that crack is actually in the old alignment of Talbot Trail. So if projected west, that crack will just run right through pretty much that southbound lane of Talbot Trail. And with the type of rotational and shear failure that we're seeing out there, that could be ultimately what happens to the road at that location as well as projected to the west. So I do want to quickly touch upon the detour route, just to make it clear to council. I know it's a very unique detour route. The reason why is because we're dealing with two different types of traffic here. Heavy truck traffic, as this is a truck route, Talbot Trail and a regional route. So the truck traffic, the heavy haul route traffic is recommended to use middle line. That is the next road to the north that is adequate and sufficient for this type of vehicular loading. So that detour shown in green on this map here adds approximately 9 kilometers or 4 minutes of time versus the 48 kilometers should they stay on Talbot Trail. And this is basically going from Wheatley to Blenheim. Now, local traffic, on the other hand, is still permitted to use Talbot Trail. They can follow the truck route detour, which is the green, or they can continue to use Talbot Trail. They'll have two different options when they get to the road closure. They can go up Coatsworth. However, our recommended detour is always to recommend the next hard surface road. We don't typically detour for long duration detours. We don't typically detour on the gravel roads. Therefore, the next hard surface road to the north is back up the middle line. So the first option, yes, does add a significant kilometer in time delay should they go up Coatsworth, over middle, and down Port, back on Talbot Trail again. But of course, there is that second option for them to use our local gravel roads. So as an example, we'll be using that very first gravel road to the north, which is concession line 2, which only adds an additional 2 kilometers. So planning ahead, and here's that image from Peter's presentation earlier. It projects 50-year shoreline based on historical regression rates. The current data, again, shows this up to 20 times faster. Therefore, continuing to move the road slightly to the north would only serve as a short-term solution. The old alignment at Talbot Trail was moved back in 2010. This was a quick fix to accommodate traffic flow on already owned municipal lands. We're currently actively working on both short-term and long-term options that will take into consideration the current regression rates noted, as well as the Lake Erie shoreline study. And of course, municipality implemented the required detour signs as quickly as possible to ensure that the detour traffic moves efficiently, and we are continuing to review and improve the signage as required, which includes signs supporting local businesses. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't know if there's
Sorry, Councillor Harrigan? We're just talking about timing here. We've got like 8 minutes left.
I'll try to be
And
super
in about
fast.
5 minutes, I'm going to have to ask for an extension if we keep going. So.
Yep. So, thank you. I just wanted to call out that I appreciate that you've brought in consultants, so it wasn't just a municipal decision to close the road. It was done in partnership with consultants. Is that accurate?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Can you explain very briefly the difference between closing a road for this type of purpose versus construction where you might leave one lane open?
So the reason why we chose to close this entire road is because we in consultation with our consultant feel that the road is not safe for vehicular loading, for any kind of additional loading. Any time that we could buy on this road because of the current stability and or instability of the road and the structural integrity of the road, it is not recommended to get any vehicular loading right now. We're trying to move quickly as possible to come up with, again, a short and a long-term solution to bring forward to council. A construction, of course, we're not dealing with, I guess, these severe concerns of failure and public risk. And anytime public risk comes into the equation, we, of course, err on the side of safety at all times and make sure that we're making the right decision. So it's construction plus, it's again, a construction delay would be a short-term delay versus something like this could be a little bit more lengthy of a delay.
Mm-hmm. And based on your presentation, there is currently no timeline for when Talbot Trail is expected to open.
So as recommended in the presentation and as also denoted to the media and to the public to date, is that we are recommending holding off until we have a study in hand, which is that shoreline study, as well as we proceed with something called a municipal class environmental assessment. That is a mandatory requirement anytime you look at, investigate options for road relocations, for road downloading, et cetera. So that's two processes that are going to be underway. One's already underway. The other one's going to be started very soon, so that we can come back to council with a strong recommendation that takes into consideration all the right tools.
And just to amalgamate some of my questions, there are some businesses and residents that are concerned about some of the impacts this has. So service, as an example, now people live on a dead-end road, or if residents are living on where the area is closed, what's going to happen? Is there a plan for an on-site community meeting, or for some of this communication to be provided to us so that we can pass on to local residents and businesses?
Yes, so engineering staff, myself personally, I did offer the service to go out and speak with the public. I'm happy to do so and continue with that. I know it's something I communicated with both yourself as well as Councillor Oche. I'm happy to continue with that and arrange a meeting. It was recommended maybe to even have it on site or within proximity to the site, so that the public and everyone will have a better understanding of what we're looking at and what we're faced with. So it's something I'm happy to continue with planning with you.
Okay, so maybe let's look to schedule that in the next week or two if we can possibly. I know there's lots of timely questions.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
I've got Councillor Scotchy, Crew, and Foss. I'll give you 30 seconds each. Oh. Councillor Scotchy.
Really quick, just want to remind everybody, invite everybody to Cherry Fest this weekend in Blenheim. And I think we'd really be doing a big disservice to our community if we, as leaders, didn't take a second to acknowledge Councillor Crew for her dedication to the community for 20 years. So I think that it's very important. She is passing over the torch, but I think that it's very important we give her a round of applause and thank her for 20 years. And that is it for me.
All right, Councillor Crew, follow up on that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I would like to thank, we each received a Bible on our desk tonight, and it's on behalf of the Wallace-Bergen District Ministerial Association, so thank you so much for that. And I also, just to follow up with Councillor Sakachi, would like to invite everyone, when you're not at the Cherry Fest or in Mitchell's Bay, drop by Eastside Pride's event at 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Saturday, and there's a lot of things going on, a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you out to celebrate with us. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Foss.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just like to congratulate the Mitchell's Bay and Area Association for their very successful 6th annual bass tournament. There was over 80 teams. Those teams are filled up again for next year. It's gone over so well, and a great tourism opportunity. I talked to a group from Ohio. This is their 3rd or 4th time there, and they're not there just for the tournament. They're there for the whole week prior to that. So it's a real tourism attraction, so kudos to them.
Thank you. First and second reading. Councillor Solomon, seconded by Councillor Finn. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Third and final reading. Councillor Solomon, seconded by Councillor Hall. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Resolution, council in closed session and adjournment.
I don't know if I have time. No. The Chatham-Kent
We'll blame
Council-
you if we don't get finished on
I move
time.
the Chatham-Kent Council adjourn to its next meeting to be held August 12th, 2019, and Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the municipal act.